The Bootstrap Paradox. Who gave Beethoven the sheet music? Let us drift into a thought that is as calm as bedtime and as strange as realizing your favorite childhood photo was taken by someone who was not born yet. The lights are dim. Your mind is ready to relax. But then a question sneaks in like an uninvited raccoon. What if I go back in time and give Beethoven the sheet music to his own symphony, and he uses it to become famous, but I only knew it because he wrote it? Welcome to the Bootstrap Paradox, one of time travel's most confusing little tricks, and a perfect companion for anyone trying to fall asleep while also unraveling causality, like a tangled pair of headphones from 2007. And hey, before this gets too loopy, do not forget to like, subscribe, and tap that little bell for more paradoxes, philosophical bedtime stories, and logical whirlpools that make you say, "Wait, what?" If you have ever wondered who invented the idea of inventing things, leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read them all. Now, exhale, and let us gently mess with time. So here is the paradox in cozy night language. Imagine a time traveler. Let us call him Dave, because Dave sounds like someone who might accidentally break time. One night, Dave decides to travel back to the 18th century and give a copy of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony to young Ludwig himself. Ludwig, impressed and inspired, copies it down, performs it, becomes the musical genius we all know, and history proceeds. Time goes on. Dave grows up, hears Beethoven's Fifth, learns music, and eventually decides to time travel and bring the sheet music back to Beethoven. Now pause. Where did the music actually come from? No one composed it. No creative spark ever existed. It just looped. The sheet music was passed from Dave to Beethoven, from Beethoven to the world, from the world back to Dave. Like an idea with no origin, a gift that no one bought, a tweet that retweeted itself into existence. This is the Bootstrap Paradox. It is called that not because it involves fashion or dusty cowboy footwear, but because of the old expression, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, which is an impossible image. Try it, and you will mostly pull your socks off. The idea is that something is caused by itself. It brings itself into being. It loops with no beginning and no end, like a circular train route with no station, only sleepy passengers wondering where their luggage went. And yes, your brain is supposed to itch. Here is the kicker. This paradox is not just fun for philosophers and time travel fan fiction. It actually touches real science. Theoretical physicists use it to talk about closed time-like curves, paths through space-time that loop back on themselves. These are serious equations, with math and chalkboards and people who probably have very strong opinions about wormholes. But back to bedtime. Let us take another example. Imagine you are reading a science fiction novel. You love it. It blows your mind. You travel back in time and hand the manuscript to a young writer who is just starting out. Inspired, they publish it. That book becomes famous. The version you read in the future is the same one they publish in the past. So who wrote it? Not you, not them. It just existed. Information without origin, knowledge from nowhere. A plot twist that should not exist, and yet here it is, keeping you awake at 2:17 a.m. as your tea gets cold and your sense of causality quietly packs its bags. You might be thinking, okay, this is weird, but who cares? It is just a fun sci-fi story. But it is more than that. The Bootstrap Paradox highlights one of the strangest features of time travel, the potential breakdown of causality. That sacred rule that says things happen for a reason suddenly becomes things happen because they already happened. Imagine if Isaac Newton did not actually discover gravity. Imagine a time traveler handed him a physics textbook. He publishes it. And then someone in the future learns from that, goes back, hands it to Newton, and loop. Where did the knowledge of gravity originate? This is where the mind starts making squeaky noises like an old refrigerator. Because if causality can loop like this, it changes everything we understand about information, invention, and even identity. It is like a song that no one wrote, but everyone heard, or a painting that no one painted, but somehow it hangs in a museum. This is not just a fun what if. It is a fundamental poke at how reality works. Now let us apply this to something more relatable. Imagine you have a recipe for your grandma's famous cookies. You love them. You go back in time and give them to your grandma when she was young. She bakes them, passes them down, and one day you inherit the recipe. Where did the original recipe come from? Not grandma, not you. It just appeared. Which means that technically, the cookies are delicious lies. Even relationships can feel like this. You love someone. They inspire you. You go back and help them become who they are. But you were only able to do that because of who they already were. And now you are stuck in a loop of emotional chicken and egg soup. Let us zoom out for a second. What makes the Bootstrap Paradox truly unsettling is not just the time travel. It is the philosophical question underneath. Can something exist without ever being created? Can knowledge, art, inventions, relationships, can they all loop infinitely, like laundry cycles in the dryer of the cosmos? Theoretically, yes. And this is where some physicists bring in quantum mechanics and the idea that time may not be as linear as we like to think. That perhaps, under very specific conditions, information could travel backwards and preserve itself in a stable loop, like a cosmic email chain where no one knows who hit send first. And if that sounds a bit too sci-fi for your taste, do not worry. The universe probably does not work this way. Probably. Many scientists think the Bootstrap Paradox points to why certain forms of time travel might be impossible in the first place. Or, at the very least, that the universe has built-in mechanisms, like the Novikov self-consistency principle, that stop paradoxes from happening. The cosmos might be clever enough to say, "Nice try, Dave," but Beethoven still has to write his own music. But even if the universe prevents actual bootstrap paradoxes, the idea remains a useful mental playground. It shows us how delicate our understanding of time is, how cause and effect might just be a comforting illusion. That reality might be held together by storytelling more than laws of physics, and storytelling matters. Because in the end, every bootstrap paradox is just a narrative loop, a plot device with no first page. And sometimes, that is exactly what our minds need to explore, especially when the goal is not to solve anything, but simply to wonder. So maybe the origin does not matter. Maybe what matters is the experience, the music we hear, the book we read, the cookie we eat, even if it came from nowhere. That is the strange beauty of the Bootstrap Paradox. It reminds us that the line between creation and memory is blurrier than we think, that the origin of things might not always be traceable, and that sometimes knowing who started the loop is less important than what we do with it. And now, as you start to drift, I will leave you with this final thought. If you hand your future self a to-do list from your past self and then forget to do it, is that still technically procrastination? The Ontological Paradox, the loop where you become your own origin story. Let us return to the strange little place where philosophy tucks itself into bed. The lights are low. Your body is still. Your thoughts are gently trying to drift off into something soft and forgettable. And then, as if on cue, your brain leans over and whispers, "What if you are your own parent?" This is the Ontological Paradox. A thought experiment that does not knock. It simply shows up in your mental living room, opens the fridge of logic, and eats all your assumptions. At its heart, this paradox is about time travel. But not the kind with flying cars or glittering wormholes. No, this is the kind that takes your sense of identity and folds it like a fitted sheet in a strong wind. It is where a person, object, or piece of information is its own origin. No clear beginning, no first cause. Just an endless loop where A creates B and B creates A. Imagine a person named Alex. Alex is smart, curious, and also mildly reckless with temporal physics. One afternoon, Alex discovers a time machine in an abandoned observatory. which is exactly where one would expect to find a time machine. Curious, Alex steps inside, pokes a few buttons, and is accidentally sent back 50 years. While adjusting to life in the past, Alex meets someone, falls in love, and has a child. Circumstances unfold, emotional, complicated, better suited to fictional drama, and that child is placed in an orphanage. The child grows up, becomes smart, curious, and mildly reckless with temporal physics, and one day stumbles across a time machine in an abandoned observatory. That child is Alex. The loop closes. There is no external beginning. No one outside the loop started the chain of events. Alex exists because Alex caused Alex to exist. It is like a story that wrote itself, printed itself, read itself, and then recommended itself as a 5-star read. This is the ontological paradox, and it is not just a bedtime curiosity. It is a serious question wrapped in absurdity. A paradox about origins, identity, and causality that asks, can something or someone exist without a clear beginning? The term ontological comes from ontology, the philosophical study of being. That sounds grand, but it really means, what does it mean for something to exist? In this paradox, existence becomes a circle. It is not a straight line. There is no first spark, no origin, just the loop. Let us step back. Usually when you think about people, you imagine they have parents. Those parents had parents. Those parents had parents, and so on, stretching backward into the misty swamps of ancient ancestry. But what if that whole tree collapses into a loop? What if someone had no parents at all, except themselves? This is not entirely new to fiction. One of the most famous versions of the ontological paradox appears in Robert Heinlein's story, All You Zombies. The plot is a dizzying spiral of gender identity, time travel, and self-creation. Without giving away too much, the story involves one character who is their own mother and father. Yes, both. Do not try to draw a family tree. You will end up with something that looks like a pretzel having an identity crisis. The key idea is this: if someone goes back in time and becomes their own parent, then where did they originally come from? Who started the cycle? The answer, according to the paradox, is no one. The person simply exists within a self-sustaining loop, like a cosmic recycling program that forgot to start. Let us use something simpler. Imagine a time traveler gives Shakespeare a copy of Hamlet. Shakespeare copies it down, publishes it, and becomes famous. Centuries later, that book is found by the time traveler, who takes it back and gives it to Shakespeare. Where did the play come from? Shakespeare did not write it. The time traveler did not write it. It just existed, forever caught in a loop of citation without a source. In this case, the information is ontologically paradoxical. It exists, but without origin, like a ghost that lives in the attic of time, whispering its own name into the past. Now apply this to a person, and things get weirder. A person who is their own parent has no external biological origin. Their DNA is a closed loop. Their identity, memory, and existence are all products of the same loop that keeps feeding itself. There is no moment where something new begins, only a constant recycling of what already is. This is what makes the ontological paradox different from other time travel problems. The grandfather paradox is about changing the past and creating contradiction. The Bootstrap Paradox is about information with no origin. But the ontological paradox is personal. It is about a being that comes into existence not through evolution, not through natural processes, but through a perfectly timed act of self-causing time travel. And that, philosophically, breaks several bones in the skeleton of common sense. It challenges causality. It challenges biology. It challenges bedtime. Still, let us not panic. Let us instead ask, is this possible? According to general relativity, closed time-like curves, the technical term for time loops, are theoretically allowed under certain conditions. You need things like wormholes, exotic matter, and a willingness to ignore the headache. But the math does not automatically forbid these loops. This is where the debate becomes more philosophical than physical. Just because the equations allow it, does that mean the universe does? Some theories suggest the universe might prevent paradoxes through something called the Novikov self-consistency principle. In essence, this principle says that any actions you take while time traveling must already be part of history. You can travel, but you cannot change anything. Under this rule, the ontological paradox is not only possible, it is consistent. A person who causes their own existence is simply fulfilling history. There is no contradiction, no violation, only strangeness. So perhaps the universe does allow these loops. Perhaps somewhere out there, a person exists with no external origin. A person born not from cause, but from a closed circuit of being. This leads to deep questions about identity. What makes you, you? Is it your biology, your past, your family? Or is it continuity? The experience of being you, day after day, memory after memory. If someone remembers growing up, has memories, feelings, goals, are they any less real because they were not born the usual way? Maybe not. Perhaps identity is less about origin and more about coherence. A story told well, even if it never had a first chapter. Let us consider another metaphor. Imagine a sculpture that appears in a museum. No artist ever claims it. No records exist. But it inspires visitors. People admire it. Take photos, talk about its meaning. Generations pass. The sculpture is restored, preserved, studied. It becomes a part of culture. And then, one day, someone discovers a time machine and places the sculpture back in the past, in that very museum. It had no creator, but it mattered. It had an impact. It became part of the world. Maybe the same is true for ontological beings. Maybe their value lies not in how they came to be, but in what they are while they exist. That is one way to see the paradox. Another is simply to admire how strange and beautiful it is that time travel can create loops like this. That logic can stretch just far enough to allow someone to be both the author and the book, the question and the answer. It is like being your own fairy godmother, without the wand or the dress. Unless you want the dress, that is up to you. So here we are, at the edge of reason, looking into the loop, watching a person walk out of a time machine and hand the past the key to their own existence. No beginning, no end, just a perfect circle. And now, as the loop begins to fold itself quietly back into your mind, here is one final question to keep under your pillow. If you meet your own parent and it is you, do you still have to remember your birthday, or can you just send yourself a cake and call it even? The self-creation paradox. Building yourself from scratch, using only yourself. Let us return once more to that familiar state between wide awake and almost asleep. The blankets are heavy, the room is quiet, and your mind is gently whispering. This is the moment for rest. But just as your breathing slows and the day begins to melt away, your brain, never one to follow protocol, decides to ask, can something create itself? Not metaphorically, not through self-improvement or a motivational quote, literally. As in, can a person, object, or idea cause its own existence? This is the self-creation paradox. A paradox so strange, it makes mirrors feel nervous. A cousin to the Bootstrap Paradox and the Ontological Paradox, this one focuses directly on the idea of circular creation. No beginning, no creator. Just a loop where something exists because it decided to, before it existed, by causing itself into being after it already was. Yes, the headache is normal. Let us set the stage with a classic science fiction scenario. Imagine a brilliant scientist named Max. Max is a genius, a loner, and has access to a lab that most governments would describe as highly concerning. One night, after years of theoretical work and an unhealthy number of energy drinks, Max builds a machine. Not just any machine, a self-assembling machine. This machine, once activated, begins constructing a copy of itself. The copy then builds another, That one builds another. Soon, a chain of identical machines stretches across the lab floor, each one building the next. Max calls this recursive engineering. The world calls it weird. But then, one of the machines does something strange. It builds a time machine, not from blueprints, not from parts it learned about. It just does it, like it always knew. It activates the time machine and sends a version of itself back to the past, right before Max's discovery. That machine appears in the past, helps Max build the original prototype, and sets everything in motion. So, where did the machine come from? Max did not invent it. The machine helped invent itself. It existed because it helped itself exist. This is the self-creation paradox. It is one of the purest expressions of closed causality. Something exists because it caused itself. It is a paradox that looks at the rulebook of physics and quietly replaces page 1 with a picture of itself smiling. To explain it in simpler terms, imagine a book that appears on your doorstep. You read it. It changes your life. Years later, you travel back in time and give that same book to your younger self. That version of you reads it. The loop continues. No one wrote the book. It exists because it was always passed along, always self-circulated. Now take that logic and apply it to a person, or an invention, or the universe. The self-creation paradox says something can be its own parent, architect, and origin point. It does not come from nothing. It comes from itself. Like a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat, only the rabbit designed the hat and taught the magician how to do the trick. This idea can be unsettling, especially if you are used to thinking in terms of beginnings and ends. Most things in life follow a path. Someone builds a thing, someone else uses it. Time moves forward. Cause leads to effect. It is simple, clean, respectable. But the self-creation paradox says, what if the effect causes the cause? And suddenly, everything gets a bit wobbly. In philosophy, this creates problems. For centuries, thinkers have asked, can something be the source of itself? Can a being bring itself into existence? Can an event be its own trigger? Many have said no. Logic prefers things to have roots, origins, seeds. If you say something created itself, you are removing the beginning, and that makes causality very uncomfortable. In religion, this paradox dances dangerously close to the idea of a self-created deity. A being that exists because it exists. No beginning, no predecessor. Just pure, infinite self-existence. In science, the paradox becomes even more mind-bending. In theoretical physics, time loops, closed time-like curves, are mathematically plausible under specific conditions. That means it is possible, at least on paper, for something to travel through time, interact with its past, and affect its own creation. This leads to models where particles influence their own state, or energy fields reinforce their own presence. It is not common, it is not observed, but the math does not rule it out entirely. Now let us look at a more human example. Imagine a woman named Clara. Clara grows up an orphan, always wondering where she came from. She becomes a physicist, studies time travel, and eventually travels back to the past. There she meets a man, falls in love, and has a child. That child is named Clara. She becomes an orphan, grows up, studies time travel. You see where this is going. The loop is closed. Clara is her own origin, no outside parent, no beginning. Just an endless cycle of creation wrapped around itself like a snake swallowing its own birth certificate. This is where the self-creation paradox intersects with the Bootstrap and Ontological paradoxes. All three share the idea of closed causal loops. But the self-creation paradox is the boldest. It says, you do not need an outside cause. You can exist because you caused yourself. It is bold, it is elegant, and it causes existential static in the part of your brain labeled normal. Let us pause here and consider what this means. If something can cause itself, what does that do to our idea of time? It suggests that time may not be linear, that perhaps time is a loop, or a spiral, or something even stranger, a structure where cause and effect feed into each other endlessly, like a conversation where no one remembers who spoke first. It also suggests that existence itself might not require an initial push, that under certain conditions, reality could sustain itself in cycles, feedback loops, echoes, and maybe, just maybe, this is not a flaw. Maybe it is a feature. Maybe the universe is not a line of dominoes. Maybe it is a carousel. And some things do not fall forward. They spin. This is where the paradox becomes more than a puzzle. It becomes a reflection on how we see creation. We like to ask, where did it come from? But what if some things did not come from anywhere? What if they simply are, because they are? That is a difficult idea to hold, especially when applied to the universe itself. Some cosmological models suggest that the universe may be self-originating, that quantum fluctuations in a vacuum created the universe, and that those fluctuations were caused by the conditions that the universe later provided. The universe may have created itself, not in the sense of pulling itself out of thin air, but in the sense of being a closed system, with rules and events that loop into their own existence. A cosmic self-assembly kit with instructions that it wrote for itself after it read them. This may sound abstract, but it touches something deeply human. We often feel pressure to find our source, our root, our explanation. But perhaps existence does not always offer clear answers. Perhaps some things are real because they sustain themselves, because they continue, because they loop. This is not just science fiction. It is philosophy, physics, and a soft whisper in the dark that says, what if the answer is not before the question, but after it? The self-creation paradox may never be resolved, but that is its gift. It makes us think, not just about time or causality, but about what it means to exist. Perhaps meaning does not come from where we started, but from the patterns we form, the loops we complete, the echoes we leave behind. And now, as we gently fold this chapter into the spiral of your thoughts, here is one final question to carry with you. If you accidentally invented yourself, are you still allowed to blame your parents for your taste in music? The Predestination Paradox. The room is still. You are half awake, half asleep, somewhere between, I should go to bed earlier, and, what if I am not in control of anything? Just when your thoughts begin to dissolve into calm and comfort, your mind casually throws in a philosophical landmine. What if every choice I make is already written? Welcome to the Predestination Paradox. A paradox so unnerving, it makes your horoscope feel like a federal document. It is the gentle yet existential realization that if time travel is real, and if you go back to change something, you may discover you were never meant to change it. In fact, you were always part of the story. This is not just a fun thought for science fiction fans or late-night dorm conversations. This paradox has teeth. It asks if we truly have free will, or if our actions are simply part of a timeline that cannot be changed, only fulfilled. Let us break it down. Imagine a man named Leo. Leo receives a mysterious letter predicting a tragic fire at the local museum. It lists the time, the location, and even the reason the fire will start. Shocked, Leo rushes to the museum, determined to stop it. In the chaos of trying to prevent the blaze, Leo knocks over a display. That display hits a candle. The candle falls onto a velvet curtain. The curtain bursts into flames. Leo starts the fire he tried to stop. This is the Predestination Paradox in action. Leo's attempt to change the future is what causes it. His destiny is not just unchangeable, it is sealed by the very act of trying to escape it. Now you may ask, why is this called predestination? The term comes from the idea that events are predetermined. Not in a vague mystical sense, but in a timeline where your actions, no matter how independent they feel, are already accounted for. If time is a loop, then everything you do has already happened. It is like watching a movie for the second time. and yelling at the main character to take a different path. They cannot hear you, they never could. The film is locked. So is the timeline. One of the best examples of this paradox comes from the 2014 film aptly titled Predestination. In it, a time-traveling agent is assigned to stop a criminal. Through a series of reality-bending twists and identity spirals, the agent discovers that he is not just chasing the criminal, he is the criminal. He always was. Try explaining that to airport security. This is where the Predestination Paradox starts to unravel your sense of self. Because it suggests that your actions, your choices, your grand gestures of rebellion against fate, they may all be part of fate. Imagine you travel back in time to prevent a war. You deliver a warning, you plead for peace, but your presence, your interference, causes mistrust, confusion, and panic. The very war you tried to stop erupts because of you. You did not prevent history, you fulfilled it. Now let us bring this into more relatable terms. Have you ever had a moment where you tried to avoid something only to cause it? You try not to spill the coffee, but your overcorrection makes you knock it over. You try to dodge traffic by taking a shortcut, and the shortcut becomes a 2-hour tour of your regrets. The Predestination Paradox is this concept, expanded to the universe. You try to change the timeline, only to discover you were the reason it unfolded that way in the first place. Some theorists believe that this paradox could be a built-in safety mechanism of the universe, that if time travel were possible, reality would protect itself. You could never change the timeline because any attempt to do so would already be part of it. Think of time as a woven rug. You can travel along the threads, but you cannot snip them. If you try, you simply tug at a thread that was always meant to move. Philosophers and physicists alike have wrestled with this paradox. It touches on determinism, causality, and the nature of time. It raises questions like, can you be held responsible for something you were always going to do? Are you free, or are you a character in a script you never agreed to? Some find this comforting. If everything is pre-written, then every mistake was meant to happen. Every failure was part of a larger pattern. You are not lost. You are exactly where you are supposed to be. Others find it terrifying. If the future is set, then there is no choice, no escape, no authorship over your life, just a role to perform in a story that has already ended. The paradox is often tied to the idea of fate. In Greek mythology, the fates spun, measured, and cut the thread of each life. Even the gods could not defy them. In the Predestination Paradox, the fates wear lab coats and argue about tachyon particles. But the theme is the same. Destiny rules. This is where the paradox splits from other time loops. In the Bootstrap Paradox, an object or idea creates itself. In the Ontological Paradox, identity loops into its own origin. But the Predestination Paradox adds emotional weight. Because it makes you wonder, are your best efforts futile? Or are they meaningful because they were always meant to be? Now consider the ethics. If a time traveler murders someone in the past, but that event was always going to happen, are they guilty? If a hero tries to save someone and fails, only to discover that failure was part of history, are they to blame? The paradox suggests that our sense of cause and effect is too simple, that events may not be triggered linearly, that consequences may precede intentions, that the beginning may come after the end. Take, for instance, a time traveler who gives Shakespeare his first play. Shakespeare publishes it, gains fame, and writes more. Years later, someone inspired by Shakespeare travels back and hands him that first script. Where did the script come from? Who is the author? No one. Or everyone. That is the twist of predestination. You cannot change the past because you already did. This leads us to one of the more subtle consequences of the paradox, the illusion of choice. It may feel like you are making decisions, turning left instead of right, saying yes instead of no. But if the timeline already includes your choice, then your freedom is only apparent. You were always going to say yes, always going to turn left, always going to wonder if you were ever really choosing at all. But perhaps this is not as bleak as it sounds. Maybe what matters is not whether the future is fixed, but how you live it. Maybe the experience of choice is what gives life meaning, even if the outcome is already written. After all, when you rewatch a movie, you know how it ends. But you still enjoy the scenes, the dialogue, the journey. The Predestination Paradox invites us to think deeply about our place in time, not just as passengers, but as necessary threads in a tapestry that cannot unravel. It tells us that our actions, no matter how predictable, are still ours. That the past may be unchangeable, but the present is still something we can feel. That destiny, rather than being a prison, might just be a story so perfectly told, even the plot twists feel familiar. And now, before we disappear into the time loop again, there is just one question left to ask. If you traveled back in time to warn yourself not to travel back in time, did you just ground yourself in two separate centuries? The Grandfather Paradox, time travel's most awkward family reunion. Picture this. You are relaxing. The air is still. Your brain is almost done thinking. Then, just as your muscles loosen and your thoughts prepare to drift into sleep mode, a curious little voice inside your head says, "What if you traveled back in time and accidentally erased your own existence?" Welcome to the Grandfather Paradox, one of the most famous, most dramatic, and most headache-inducing time travel paradoxes in all of science fiction. This paradox is the undisputed heavyweight champion of messing with your understanding of cause and effect. It does not knock gently on the door of logic. It barges in, kicks the furniture, and rewrites the guest list. Let us begin with a scenario. Imagine you invent a time machine. Perhaps it is made out of a toaster, perhaps a wristwatch, or perhaps a suspiciously glowing bathtub. The important part is that it works. You can now go back in time. So you do. You decide to visit the year 1920, where your grandfather is a young man, single, full of dreams, and completely unaware that one day he will become your grandfather. You observe him from a distance. Then you get involved. Maybe you trip and spill coffee on his favorite shirt. Maybe you accidentally convince him to become a monk. Maybe, in a terrible misunderstanding, you push him in front of a moving Model T Ford. And suddenly he never meets your grandmother. They never fall in love. They never start a family. Your parent is never born. Which means you are never born. Which means you never built the time machine. Which means you never went back. Which means your grandfather is fine. Which means he meets your grandmother. Which means you are born. Which means you do build the time machine. Which means you do go back. Which means you do push him in front of the Ford. And round it goes, like a logic merry-go-round where no one can get off. This is the Grandfather Paradox, a situation where changing the past creates a contradiction that destroys the very cause of the change. It is like trying to pull the rug out from under yourself while standing on it, or deleting a file from your computer by deleting the computer first. The paradox was first formally described in the 20th century, but the idea goes back much further. Even ancient stories hint at the danger of tampering with destiny. The difference is that now we have equations, theories, an entire television series dedicated to making it even more confusing. So what makes this paradox so powerful? It is not just about killing a relative, dramatic as that may be. It is about causality, the sacred relationship between cause and effect. The Grandfather Paradox breaks that relationship. It says, what if the effect undoes the cause? It is like someone lighting a candle with a match, and then the candle traveling back in time to blow out the match before it was struck. Let us try a softer version. Imagine you go back in time to stop a war. You succeed, but because the war never happened, the future version of you who wanted to stop it no longer exists. So you never go back. So the war does happen. So you do exist. So you do go back. So it does not happen. So, you get it. The contradiction is not just logical, it is emotional. It forces us to question identity, responsibility, and the ripple effects of our choices. This is why the grandfather paradox appears in countless science fiction stories, films, books, games. They love it because it raises the stakes, it creates tension, and it allows characters to wrestle with the ultimate question: if you could change the past, should you? Now let us explore how science responds to this paradox. Some physicists say, simple, you cannot change the past. According to the Novikov self-consistency principle, any actions you take in the past were already part of history. You can travel back, you can interact, but you cannot cause a paradox. The timeline bends, but it does not break. If you go back to kill your grandfather, you will fail. Every time. Not because fate stops you, but because history already includes your failure. Another explanation involves multiple timelines. According to the many worlds interpretation, anytime you make a change in the past, you create a new branch of reality. So if you kill your grandfather, you do not erase yourself. You simply create a version of reality where you were never born. Meanwhile, your original timeline continues, unchanged. This means that your grandfather paradox does not cause a contradiction. It causes a multiverse. And now there are two timelines, one where you exist and one where you do not, and possibly a third where you are stuck paying rent in both. But not everyone is satisfied with this explanation. Some theorists suggest that time travel to the past is fundamentally impossible, precisely because of paradoxes like this one. The laws of the universe, they argue, are built to prevent this kind of contradiction. Time, like a stern librarian, does not allow you to remove books from the shelf that have not yet been written. Of course, this does not stop people from trying. In fiction, time travelers constantly get tangled in their own ancestry. They meet their parents before they are born. They become their own grandfather. They accidentally invent Elvis. It is all part of the fun. But what if we take the paradox more seriously? What does it tell us about our own lives? Even without a time machine, we constantly think about the past. We replay moments. We wonder what would have happened if we had done something differently. If we had taken the other job, dated the other person, chosen a different major, said yes instead of no. The grandfather paradox is the extreme version of that impulse. It is the ultimate what if. What if you could go back and undo the very thing that made you who you are? Would you? And if you did, who would you become? The paradox also touches on guilt. Many people wish they could go back and fix something they regret. But what if fixing it erased everything that followed? Every lesson, every relationship, every part of you that grew from that mistake? Would it be worth it? That is the quiet wisdom buried inside the paradox. It shows us that the past is not just a place. It is a foundation. Even the painful parts, especially the painful parts. Without them, we might not be here. And if we erase them, we might not be ourselves. So maybe time travel is not just a scientific curiosity. Maybe it is a mirror, a way to reflect on our choices, our origins, and the strange, beautiful sequence of events that brought us to this moment. And yes, it also gives us an excuse to ask absurd questions like, if I punched my grandfather before he met my grandmother, would that technically be emotional time vandalism? Probably. But it would also be the beginning of another loop. A loop of questions, of curiosity, of wondering. Because that is what paradoxes do best. They do not answer. They ask, they invite, they confuse. And somewhere in the confusion, you find meaning. Not a clear answer, but a sense that even the contradictions are worth thinking about. Now, before your thoughts start planning their own historical interventions, here is one final question to toss into your timeline. If you went back in time and convinced your grandfather to break up with your grandmother, are you just very bad at matchmaking or accidentally excellent at disappearing? The reverse causality paradox, when the effect shows up first and the cause is fashionably late. The air is still. Your pillow is soft. Your thoughts are quieting down. Everything in your body is saying it is time to rest. But then, from the strange corners of your imagination, a curious question appears and politely refuses to leave. What if something happened because of an event that has not happened yet? Welcome to the reverse causality paradox, a delightful brain pretzel where effects do not wait for causes and time stops behaving like a polite, orderly line and starts acting like jazz. You are probably used to causality behaving itself. You flip the switch and the light turns on. You sneeze and someone blesses you. You pour milk after cereal and everyone pretends that is normal. Cause leads to effect. It is one of the universe's favorite rules. It is the reason we can tell stories in order and not start with someone running out of a burning building and only explain why 20 minutes later. But reverse causality says, what if the effect comes first? What if you are running out of the building before the fire even starts? Let us walk through a classic example. You are at home. Suddenly, your window shatters. A baseball crashes into your lamp. Glass everywhere. You run outside to yell at whoever did it, but the street is empty. No kids, no ball games, just silence. 5 minutes later, a kid walks by with a bat and a baseball, swinging aimlessly. He drops the ball. It rolls, bounces, and somehow flies through your now already broken window. You stare in disbelief. The window broke before the kid ever threw the ball. This is the reverse causality paradox. An event happens because of something that has not occurred yet. The future reaches back and gives the past a nudge. It is like your birthday cake arriving before you are born, or your phone ringing before you dial the number. It is wild, it is strange. It is oddly polite about ignoring time's traditional dress code. This paradox often shows up in discussions about time travel, quantum physics, and extremely confusing movie plots. It breaks our intuitive understanding of how the universe should work, but it also invites us to ask, is causality really that strict, or is time more flexible than we think? Let us rewind and dig into the physics. In most classical systems, causality is sacred. One thing causes another. Events are neatly ordered. But in certain interpretations of quantum mechanics, especially in discussions involving entangled particles, retrocausality, or closed time-like curves, things get complicated. Some researchers have proposed theoretical models where particles are influenced by both their past and their future. Not just one direction. 2. That is like saying your dinner depends not only on what you bought earlier, but also on what you will eat tomorrow. Let us try a simpler metaphor. Imagine you are watching a mystery movie. A detective finds a bloody glove in the first scene. Throughout the film, clues lead back to how that glove ended up there. In a traditional story, the cause, the murder, happens before the effect, the glove is found. Now imagine a version of the story where the glove appears before anyone has been killed. Then, as the film continues, the events slowly form around that glove. The effect shapes the cause. In fiction, this works beautifully. It is poetic. It is clever. In reality, it makes physicists chew pens and question everything. One of the most famous examples of reverse causality is the delayed choice experiment proposed by physicist John Wheeler. In it, the behavior of a particle seems to be influenced by how it is measured, after it has already passed through a system. In other words, the measurement decision made in the present appears to affect the particle's path in the past. It is as if a light switch in your kitchen turned on yesterday because you decided today that you wanted coffee. Now, before we all spiral into the quantum confusion zone, let us bring this back to a more human scale. Imagine you get an anonymous letter warning you not to take a specific job offer. The warning is clear. It says that if you take the job, something terrible will happen. You do not know who sent the letter. You decide to trust it. You decline the offer. Years later, you discover that you sent the letter. Future you, using a time travel service with excellent customer support. You wanted to protect your younger self. But now that you never took the job, you never suffered the disaster. Which means you never needed to send the letter. Which means you did not. Which means you did take the job. Which means, and just like that, The reverse causality paradox arrives at the same club as all the other time travel paradoxes: the grandfather paradox, the bootstrap paradox, the ontological paradox. They all share drinks and complain about how linear thinking ruins everything. But what makes reverse causality stand out is how quietly it challenges our worldview. It does not need a time machine. It does not need a massive contradiction. All it needs is a timeline where something in the future seems to be responsible for something in the past. No explosions, just a gentle ripple traveling the wrong way. Let us try another one. You are a composer. You wake up humming a beautiful melody. It feels familiar. You write it down. You perform it. It becomes famous. Years later, a young time traveler hears your song, goes back in time, and hums it outside your window. You hear it in your sleep. Where did the melody come from? You got it from the time traveler. They got it from your performance. But your performance only existed because you heard it from them. So who actually composed the song? That is reverse causality with a musical score. Now let us ask the big question: is any of this possible? According to our current understanding of physics, reverse causality is deeply problematic. It challenges causality, thermodynamics, and the basic flow of information. Most scientists treat it as a fun theoretical concept, not a blueprint for building a time-backward coffee machine. But in certain quantum models, especially those involving entangled particles, the line between past and future becomes blurry. Some researchers suggest that effects may not be strictly chained to their causes in a one-way street. There may be feedback loops, there may be echoes, there may be whispers from the future woven into the noise of the present. And that is where the paradox becomes more than just a science problem. It becomes a philosophical playground. If effects can shape causes, what does that mean for choice, for responsibility, for destiny? Are you acting today because of something you will experience tomorrow? Are your instincts really memories from the future, dressed up as gut feelings? And what if the universe is not built from a past that becomes a future, but from a full tapestry, where the future is just as real as the past, and both push and pull on the present? It is enough to make your head spin, or at least lean very gently to the left and say, "Wait, what?" Let us bring it home. The reverse causality paradox shows us that time might not be as simple as tick-tock-go. It might be more like a lake, still on the surface, full of ripples underneath. Some ripples come from the past, some from the future, and some from a very confused duck that may or may not exist yet. We may never experience reverse causality in our daily lives, but thinking about it stretches our understanding. It reminds us that the world is still mysterious, that time is still strange, and that some of our deepest questions have no easy answers, but they are still worth asking. Now, before we leave this strange little corner of temporal philosophy, here is one last question to bend your brain just a little more. If your future self tripped on a banana peel that you have not dropped yet, does that make you clumsy, psychic, or just very committed to slapstick destiny? The consistency paradox. Time travel's unbreakable rulebook. The night is quiet. Your room is dark. Your eyes are just beginning to close. And then, because your brain is a curious little rebel, a thought slips in like a cat knocking over your sense of peace. If I went back in time, could I do something that changes everything? Or would the universe stop me? Welcome to the consistency paradox. The paradox that insists that even if you have a time machine, you are still not allowed to mess with the story. It is the cosmic equivalent of a museum sign that reads, "Look but do not touch," especially the timeline. The consistency paradox is not as flashy as killing your grandfather, or accidentally being your own parent, or making Beethoven famous before Beethoven knows what a piano is. No, this paradox is more subtle. It lives in the small moments, the little decisions, the whispers of causality that refuse to budge. Let us begin with a simple story. You build a time machine. It is beautiful. Polished chrome, glowing buttons, possibly held together with duct tape and hope. You decide to use it for something important, something dramatic. You want to go back and prevent a disaster. So you set the date. You travel back. You get there just in time. But as you rush into action, something strange happens. You trip, or you forget the address. Or the person you try to warn thinks you are a lunatic in a shiny jumpsuit and calls security. Your mission fails. The disaster happens anyway. You return to the future, defeated, and then you realize your failure was already part of the past. It was always going to happen. Your interference changed nothing. You were never going to succeed. The timeline knew. The timeline does not like being changed. The timeline politely but firmly maintains consistency. This is the heart of the consistency paradox. The idea that even when time travel is possible, paradoxes are not. That the universe somehow enforces a kind of narrative integrity. You can go back, you can interact, but you cannot break the story. If you try to stop an event that has already happened, something will stop you. If you try to kill someone who is still alive in your present, you will fail. Not because of luck or skill or plot armor, but because success would create a contradiction, and the universe apparently does not allow those. The principle behind this paradox is often called the Novikov self-consistency principle, named after Russian physicist Igor Novikov. It says that any event in the past that could cause a paradox has zero probability of occurring. That means the timeline is self-correcting. It prevents contradictions not with force, but with mathematics. Let us return to our hypothetical time traveler. Say you go back in time with the intention of giving your younger self winning lottery numbers. Seems harmless enough. You write them down. You hand them over. You say, "Buy this ticket. Trust me." But then your younger self loses the note, or spills soup on it, or accidentally uses it to clean their glasses and throws it away. You return to the present to discover that nothing has changed. You are not rich. Your younger self never bought the ticket. Somehow, history found a way to protect itself, because if you had changed the past, you would have already been living in that changed future. But you were not. You were living in the exact same world you just returned to. Consistency wins. The paradox appears most clearly when we imagine scenarios that seem possible, but ultimately cannot be allowed to happen because they would create a logical contradiction. Suppose you go back and try to destroy your time machine before you invent it. If you succeed, then you never built it. But if you never built it, you never went back. But if you never went back, you never destroyed it. But if you never destroyed it, you did build it. And so on. The only way out is for the timeline to make your mission fail. Maybe the machine is locked. Maybe you forget the access code. Maybe your past self is unusually protective and calls security. Somehow, something gets in the way. This leads to a strange conclusion. If time travel to the past is real, then free will might not be. At least not when it comes to changing the past. You can do anything you want, except something that causes a paradox, which is oddly comforting and deeply frustrating. It means you can explore, you can observe, you can even interact, as long as your actions fit within the already established timeline. But if you try to change the big stuff, the defining events, the timeline becomes stubborn. Imagine trying to stop a war. No matter how hard you try, the peace treaty gets lost. The messenger is late. The ink freezes. The war happens anyway. Your actions were never going to change the outcome. They were always part of the history you came from. This makes time travel less about rewriting the past and more about fulfilling it. You are not a disruptor. You are an actor reading lines that have already been performed. And this brings up an uncomfortable question. If the past is fixed, if every event is consistent, then what about the future? Is that fixed too? If everything must be consistent, then perhaps every choice you make has already been made. Every path you take is the only one you ever could have taken. Every moment is not just happening, it is repeating itself again and again, perfectly. You are not shaping the story, You are walking through it, line by line, beat by beat. Or maybe the future is still open. Maybe consistency only applies to the past. Once an event has happened, it becomes locked. But until then, it is fluid, changeable, unknown. That is the hope, at least. The consistency paradox challenges how we think about time, freedom, and responsibility. It tells us that some things cannot be changed, not because we lack the tools, but because changing them would unravel the very logic of the universe. And perhaps the most fascinating part is that the paradox does not require violence, drama, or chaos. It is quiet, subtle. It hides behind small details: a missed train, a forgotten key, a phone that dies at the wrong moment. It lets the timeline win by making sure the moment of change never quite happens. Now let us consider a more light-hearted version. You go back in time to confess your love to someone you never had the courage to speak to. You are sure that this will change everything. You knock on their door. You deliver your speech. They smile politely and say, "Who are you?" And then they introduce you to their fiancé. Your heart sinks. But then you remember, this was the moment you stopped hoping, the moment that allowed you to move on, the moment that shaped your future. This heartbreak is exactly why you became who you are. You did not change the past, you fulfilled it. The consistency paradox wins again. That is what makes this paradox so poetic. It is not just about avoiding contradiction, it is about accepting the past. Understanding that some things cannot be rewritten, not because you are not brave enough, but because the story needs to stay whole. So next time you find yourself imagining what you would say if you could go back and fix something, remember, maybe you already tried. Maybe the moment you regret was always supposed to happen. Maybe that moment is the reason you are here now. The consistency paradox may not offer the drama of erased timelines or exploding logic, but it offers something else, a strange, quiet kind of peace. Now, as the timeline folds itself gently back into place, here is one final question to linger in your mind, like a stubborn pop-up notification. If you traveled back in time to change nothing but still tripped over a chair that always used to be there, does that mean you are consistent or just consistently clumsy? Polchinski's paradox. When a billiard ball breaks physics in your brain, the lights are low, your room is quiet, your eyes are just beginning to close, and your brain, kind, considerate thing that it is, decides now would be the perfect time to wonder. What if I sent a billiard ball through a wormhole, and it hit itself in the past, and stopped itself from going through in the first place? Welcome to Polchinski's paradox. This is a time travel paradox involving billiards, wormholes, and one of the most polite, please explain yourself moments in theoretical physics. It is the sort of thought experiment that starts with something simple, like a rolling ball, and ends with reality quietly backing out of the room while muttering about quantum stress. Let us break it down in the most bedtime-friendly way possible. Imagine you are standing next to a pool table. It is not just any pool table, it is in a lab. The lab has a wormhole in it, because of course it does. The wormhole connects one part of the table to another part, but not just in space, in time. One end of the wormhole is set 5 seconds into the past. That means anything that enters the wormhole pops out 5 seconds earlier. A lovely little shortcut through both space and time, like a fast-forward button in reverse. Now you decide to roll a billiard ball toward the wormhole. The plan is simple. It enters, it exits 5 seconds earlier, and lands wherever it lands. But then something strange happens. As the ball is rolling toward the wormhole, a second billiard ball suddenly pops out of the exit, 5 seconds early. It is the same ball. It has just gone through the wormhole. Only now, this earlier version of the ball rolls across the table and knocks the original ball slightly off course, just enough so that it misses the entrance to the wormhole. Now pause. If the ball did not go into the wormhole, then it should not have come out 5 seconds earlier. But if it did not come out earlier, then it could not have knocked itself off course, which means it should have gone into the wormhole. which means it did come out earlier, which means it did knock itself off course, which means, congratulations. You have just met Polchinski's paradox. This paradox was proposed by physicist Joseph Polchinski in 1990. It is a physical, mechanical version of the grandfather paradox, but with fewer emotional implications and more spherical geometry. It is a way of asking, what happens when cause and effect try to cancel each other out in a timeline with time travel? The real kicker here is that this paradox happens with objects that obey the known laws of physics. No grand conspiracies, no mysterious identity swaps, just a ball, a table, a wormhole, and a timeline that does not appreciate being tangled. Physicists love this paradox because it forces them to wrestle with one important question. Is time travel to the past even logically possible in a physical system? The universe, up until this point, has mostly enjoyed its neat linear flow. Events happen in order. Things roll forward. Billiard balls do not usually engage in self-sabotage. But Polchinski's paradox shows that if you introduce a closed, time-like curve, meaning a path through space-time that loops back on itself, you can run into situations where the timeline starts contradicting itself. So, what can be done? One approach is to simply say, time travel to the past is not allowed. That is the clean solution. It keeps causality intact. It lets everyone go back to their equations without a migraine. But physicists are not known for choosing the simple path. Many of them have asked, is there a way the paradox could resolve itself without contradiction? The answer might be yes. Some researchers, including Kip Thorne and his colleagues, propose that in a self-consistent universe, there would always be a way for the billiard ball to travel through the wormhole in such a way that it nudges itself, but does not prevent itself from entering the wormhole. In other words, the ball hits itself, but only lightly. It adjusts its trajectory just enough to still go through the wormhole, but on a slightly altered path. It still exits 5 seconds earlier, it still bumps itself. But the loop continues, without contradiction. This is called a self-consistent solution. The universe, rather than breaking, bends. The timeline adjusts. Cause and effect do a little dance, but they keep time. No paradox, no explosion. Just a very confused billiard ball living in a loop of self-contact. This idea aligns with the Novikov self-consistency principle, the same principle we saw in the consistency paradox. It states that events within a closed time-like curve must be self-consistent. If something happens, it must happen in a way that does not break causality. Now let us think about what that means for people. Imagine you go back in time to stop yourself from getting fired. You enter the office, you intercept an angry email, you plead your case, and somehow, you still get fired. But then you realize, your intervention was the very reason your boss found the email suspicious in the first place. Your attempt to change the event was already part of the event. You did not change the outcome. You caused it. That is Polchinski's paradox in human form. You are the billiard ball. You are the cause and the effect. You are both sides of the collision. The paradox shows us that even when time loops back on itself, the universe might still find a way to stay tidy. Not through force, but through quiet adjustment. Through outcomes that fold in on themselves rather than breaking apart. Of course, this idea is still theoretical. We do not have a wormhole in a lab. We do not have a real billiard ball rolling backward through time. But the math behind it is serious. The thought experiment remains a powerful tool for exploring the limits of physics, logic, and imagination. It also invites us to ask a very human question. What if our efforts to change the past are the very reason the past happened that way? Have you ever tried to fix something and accidentally made it worse? Or tried to avoid someone, only to bump into them twice in the same day? That odd feeling of dancing around destiny but ending up exactly where you started, that is a little piece of Polchinski's paradox in everyday life. It whispers that the world may be more connected than we realize, that cause and effect are not always separate, that sometimes the hands that guide us are our own, and maybe that is not scary, maybe it is just strange. Time loops, self-correction, paradoxes that almost break reality but pull back just in time. It all reminds us that the universe might be playful, complicated, but not necessarily chaotic. There may be structure, even in the strangest loops. And if there is one thing Polchinski's paradox teaches us, it is that time travel does not always need explosions or dramatic consequences. Sometimes, all it takes is a ball rolling across a table, hitting itself gently and continuing on its way, slightly confused, but entirely consistent. Now, as we wrap our minds around this little loop of logic, here is one final question to gently twist the ends of your thoughts. If a billiard ball hit itself hard enough to give itself amnesia, would it still remember why it was so upset with itself in the first place? Schrödinger's time traveler, alive, dead, or still waiting for the timeline to decide. You are lying in bed. Everything is quiet. You are on the edge of sleep. But then, just as your thoughts begin to melt into dreams, your brain politely taps you on the shoulder and asks, what happens if a time traveler is both alive and dead? Until you check. Welcome to Schrödinger's time traveler. This is where quantum weirdness crashes into the front porch of time travel and refuses to leave. It is 1 part science, 1 part philosophy, and 3 parts, wait, what? To understand this paradox, we first need to talk about a cat, a very famous, very theoretical cat. In 1935, physicist Erwin Schrödinger proposed a thought experiment to illustrate how bizarre quantum mechanics can be. The idea was simple. You put a cat inside a sealed box, along with a radioactive atom, a Geiger counter, and a vial of poison. If the atom decays, the counter triggers the release of poison, and the cat dies. If it does not decay, the cat lives. But here is the weird part. In quantum mechanics, particles like atoms do not just exist in one state. They exist in a superposition, meaning they are in all possible states at once, until they are observed. So until you open the box and look, the cat is both alive and dead at the same time. That is the paradox. It is not really about animal cruelty. It is about observation. Measurement, reality. What does it mean for something to be if it only is when you check? Now take that idea and hand it to a time traveler. Imagine a person named Riley. Riley builds a time machine and decides to do something bold. Travel 1 hour into the past to stop a horrible accident from happening. They step into the machine, push the button, and vanish. Now you, standing outside, are left wondering, did Riley succeed? Did they go back and prevent the accident? If they did, the accident never happened. If the accident never happened, then Riley had no reason to go back. If Riley had no reason to go back, then they never entered the time machine. If they never entered the time machine, then the accident happened. Which means they did have a reason to go back. Which means, welcome to the quantum spin cycle. Until you check, until you observe whether the accident happened or not, Riley exists in a kind of timeline limbo. They are both successful and unsuccessful, both past and present, both here and not here. Riley becomes the time-traveling equivalent of Schrödinger's cat. Not because Riley is inside a box, but because they are inside a timeline, one that has not resolved yet. One where history is waiting for observation to collapse the superposition into a single reality. This paradox touches on something deeply strange about the universe. The idea that the future, the past, and the present might all be entangled in ways we do not fully understand. In quantum physics, there is a principle called entanglement, where 2 particles become linked in such a way that the state of one instantly affects the state of the other, no matter how far apart they are. It is weird. It is powerful. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. Now imagine time is entangled in the same way. Riley's decision to travel, the accident itself, and your observation of the outcome are all linked. Until you look, the timeline has not chosen. It exists in a quantum fog, not because you are indecisive, but because the universe is polite enough to wait for your input. This is not just science fiction. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics, like the many worlds interpretation, suggest that all possible outcomes do happen, that every time Riley steps into the machine, the universe splits. In one version, Riley succeeds. In another, Riley fails. In a third, the machine makes coffee and nothing else. But in our current paradox, we are not talking about branching timelines. We are talking about one timeline, one reality, one version of events. And in that version, Riley is in flux. Until the timeline collapses, until you check, Riley is in a superposition of success and failure, just like the cat, just like the atom, just like any quantum event that has not been measured. This is what makes Schrödinger's time traveler so fascinating. It blends two of the strangest ideas in physics, quantum uncertainty and temporal causality. Quantum mechanics tells us that reality does not exist in a definite state until it is measured. Time travel tells us that the future can affect the past.
Put them together, and you get a situation where a time traveler's status, alive, dead, victorious, confused, is undefined until someone checks the outcome. And then, once checked, the timeline clicks into place. Reality settles. Riley either went back or did not. The accident either happened or did not. The box is open. The wave function has collapsed. The timeline has made up its mind. Or has it?
This paradox also plays with the idea of retrocausality, the possibility that the future can influence the past. In this case, your future observation determines Riley's past success, not because you are magical, but because the timeline is weird. It is not that Riley changes the past. It is that your awareness of Riley changes the past. Now, let us take this idea out of the lab and into your everyday life. Have you ever had a memory that only made sense once you learned more information? Like remembering a strange look someone gave you weeks ago, and suddenly realizing what it meant after reading a message from them. That feeling, that click, that sudden sense of, "Oh, now I understand," is a miniature version of the Schrödinger effect. Reality was blurry until you measured it. History waited until you knew. Or so it felt. We live in a universe where time flows forward. Events happen in order. But Schrödinger's time traveler invites us to wonder if that flow is more flexible than it appears. If maybe the past is not entirely fixed. If maybe observation really is everything. This paradox does not ask whether Riley survives. It asks whether Riley can exist in multiple outcomes at once, waiting for your attention to make one of them real. It turns you, the observer, into the final piece of the story. You are not just watching, you are deciding. That might sound dramatic, but it is part of what makes quantum mechanics so unsettling. It gives observation a kind of power, not mystical, not magical, just unavoidable. And when you mix that with time travel, you get paradoxes that do not just bend logic. They invite you to rethink what real even means. Perhaps that is why this paradox sticks in the mind. It is not explosive. It is quiet, personal. It is about waiting, watching, not knowing. And maybe that is the real reason it matters. Because we all, at some level, live with unanswered questions. Futures that have not arrived. Pasts that do not fully make sense. Choices we cannot take back. Outcomes we cannot yet see. Schrödinger's time traveler is a reminder that some parts of reality are unresolved. Not because they are broken, but because they are still unfolding. So maybe Riley is still in the box. Maybe the timeline is still humming to itself, undecided. And maybe the only thing that collapses the wave function is us. Now, before your brain folds itself into a neat little quantum origami swan, here is one final thought to keep things delightfully unmeasured. If a time traveler leaves the future, arrives in the past, and finds their own obituary waiting on the table, do they read it, or pretend it is just very intense fan mail? The observer's paradox. When watching something changes it. Especially if you time travel while doing it. The night is still. Your mind is softening like butter on warm toast. You are almost asleep. And then, in the quiet theater of your thoughts, a voice whispers the kind of question that refuses to go away. What if observing something actually changes the thing you are observing? Welcome to the observer's paradox. It is a strange little twist in reality, where the simple act of paying attention makes things behave differently. And in the world of time travel, that becomes a very big deal. Because if watching someone in the past changes what they do, then observing might not just be passive, it might be invasive. Or worse, it might be responsible for rewriting history with the awkward energy of someone entering the wrong Zoom meeting and refusing to turn off their camera. Let us start small. In everyday life, the observer's paradox is actually quite common. Sociologists, for example, have noticed that people tend to behave differently when they know they are being watched. Imagine a study trying to understand how fast people walk when they are late. If participants know they are being studied, they might speed up, or slow down, or suddenly become very philosophical about sidewalk etiquette. The act of observation alters the behavior being studied. In physics, this idea becomes even more bizarre. There is a famous experiment called the double-slit experiment. If you fire particles, say electrons, at a barrier with two slits, they behave like waves. They interfere with each other. They form a pattern on the screen behind them. It is all very elegant. But when you observe which slit the particles go through, the pattern disappears. The electrons stop behaving like waves and start behaving like tiny, polite particles who do not like being stared at. The observation collapses the wave function. Reality changes just because someone looked. Now mix that with time travel. Imagine you go back in time to observe an important moment. Just observe. No interference, no dramatic monologues. You just want to watch. Maybe it is a historical event. Maybe it is a private conversation. Maybe it is the moment your past self finally figured out how to use the washing machine without consulting YouTube. You think, this will be fine. I am just watching. But then, the person you are observing notices something, a flicker, a shadow, a breeze that was not supposed to be there. They change their behavior. The moment shifts. The future changes. And now, you are watching something that no longer leads to the outcome you came from. This is the observer's paradox wrapped in a time loop. You watched too closely, and now the thing you watched has changed. The paradox becomes, can you truly observe the past without interfering? The answer, according to this paradox, might be no. Because even if you do nothing, your presence, your observation, has an effect. A butterfly flaps its wings, and suddenly your future has different coffee brands, new politicians, and a slightly more upbeat version of jazz. This is not just science fiction. Philosophers have struggled with the nature of observation for centuries. What does it mean to know something? And can that knowledge exist without altering the thing you are trying to know? In quantum mechanics, observation collapses uncertainty. The system is in multiple possible states, until someone observes. Then, boom. One state becomes real. All the others vanish like alternate endings on a DVD you will never watch. If the universe behaves like this at the quantum level, and if time is part of that universe, then observing the past may lock it into a particular version. Your very presence in that moment, even as a silent, invisible observer, might select one history over another. Let us bring this into more relatable terms. Imagine you travel back to witness your grandparents' first meeting. You stay hidden. You do not speak. But one of them senses something strange. A presence. A moment of hesitation. A glance over the shoulder. It changes the timing. The words. The spark. Suddenly, their relationship is different. The love story you remember is gone. You go back to the present, and your family photos now include someone named Earl who really loves origami and always wears a fedora. You were not trying to interfere, but you did. Because watching is not passive. Observation is participation in disguise. Now consider this twist. What if you were being observed? What if someone from the future is watching you, right now, and their observation is shaping your decisions. Maybe that weird feeling you get when you walk into a room and forget why you are there. That could be the result of a future anthropologist taking notes on how 21st century humans navigated doorways. The observer's paradox is not just about looking back. It is about being looked at. It makes you wonder, how many of our choices are truly ours, and how many are small reactions to forces we do not understand? This idea gets even stranger when applied to memory. Some scientists believe that the act of remembering a past event can alter it in your mind. Every time you recall a memory, you are rewriting it slightly. You are editing, reprocessing, changing the tone, the emphasis, the soundtrack. In a way, remembering is observing the past, and that observation changes the memory. So even in your own mind, the past is not safe from observation. That is the core discomfort of the observer's paradox. It tells us that we cannot be neutral, not truly. The moment we observe, we shape, we influence, we alter. This becomes deeply philosophical. If watching changes reality, then what is reality before it is watched? Is there a past waiting to be seen, or is it fluid, uncertain, unresolved, until we decide to look? Maybe reality is like a stage play, and the script is written the moment the lights come on. Not before, not after, in that instant of attention. The observer's paradox invites us to be humble, to understand that curiosity is powerful, that knowledge is not free. It always comes with a cost, an influence, a shift, a change. It also makes time travel more difficult than it already was. Because now, even if you promise not to interfere, even if you swear to stay hidden, the moment you open your eyes, the past begins to tremble. This raises a question. Is it possible to know the truth of a moment without affecting it? Maybe not. Maybe the past, like the future, is a living thing. It responds to us, bends around our questions, and sometimes it bends away. But that does not mean we should not look. It just means we should look gently. Because whether we are gazing into a telescope, replaying a memory, or traveling back in time wearing suspiciously modern shoes, we are part of the moment we observe. Always. Now, before your thoughts start wondering if someone from the 31st century is currently judging your sock choices, here is one final question to keep the timeline comfortably uneasy. If a time traveler watched you spill coffee on yourself and then wrote a dissertation about it, does that count as performance art, historical evidence, or just deeply unfair surveillance? 1 to 2. The no free will paradox. When every choice was already chosen. The lights are off. Your thoughts are winding down. You are moments away from drifting into a cozy mental fog. But then your brain, as always, decides now is the time for philosophical chaos. It asks, what if I do not actually have free will? What if every decision I make was already made by me before I made it? Welcome to the no free will paradox. It is like your brain trying to open a door that is already open while arguing with itself about whether it chose to open the door in the first place. This paradox is not just about time travel. It is about agency, identity, the unsettling suspicion that you may be following a script and you are not even holding the pen. Let us begin with a simple scenario. You decide to have a snack. You walk into the kitchen, you open the fridge. You stare at a jar of olives for longer than is appropriate. Finally, you reach for the cheese. That was your decision, right? You chose it. You are in control. Now imagine someone walks in and says, actually, you were always going to choose the cheese. That was determined from the beginning. Even before you opened the fridge. Even before you were hungry. Even before the cheese was invented. You might pause. Maybe laugh. Maybe eat the cheese out of spite. But the thought sticks. What if your sense of choice is just an illusion? This is the no free will paradox, and it really comes alive when you throw time travel into the mix. Imagine you receive a letter from the future. It is written in your handwriting. It says, tomorrow you will go to the park at exactly 3:07 p.m. You will feed a squirrel. You will trip over a pine cone. You will laugh. You scoff. Obviously, this is ridiculous. You burn the letter. But the next day, you find yourself needing fresh air. You wander into the park. You sit. A squirrel appears. You have snacks. You feed it. You stand. You trip. You laugh. Exactly as described. Now pause. Did you choose to go to the park? Did you choose to feed the squirrel? Or were you simply playing out a role that had already been decided by yourself? This is where the paradox begins to feel like philosophical stage fright. You are the actor. You are the playwright. But the audience is also you, watching a play you wrote long ago, pretending you do not know the ending. Some physicists argue that if time travel to the past is possible, then free will must be limited, at least when it comes to changing the timeline. According to the Novikov self-consistency principle, that old friend, the timeline will not allow paradoxes. That means you cannot change events that have already happened. You can try, but your failure is part of the story. That raises an uncomfortable question. If you go back in time and try to do something different, and you always fail, are you really free? Or are you simply following a path that was already carved into the stone of reality? Imagine going back to save a historical figure from a tragic fate. You prepare, you plan, you act. But no matter what you do, circumstances always stop you. A door is locked, a guard is awake. You trip over your own shoelace and knock over a suit of armor. History remains intact. You return to your present, bruised and disillusioned. You did everything you could, but nothing changed. Was that failure fate? Or was it physics? Now let us complicate things even more. Imagine that before going back, you read about your failed attempt in a history book. It describes your actions exactly. Your trip, your speech, your shoelace. You know how it ends. And yet, you still go. You do not change anything. You do not try to escape your role. You become the very event you read about. Is that free will? Or is that cosmic peer pressure? Some philosophers argue that free will is not about unpredictability, it is about ownership. You knew what would happen, you accepted it, you chose to fulfill it. Others say that if the outcome was certain, then your feeling of choice was just a performance, like pressing a button that only ever had one function. This is where the no free will paradox becomes more than just a mental exercise. It begins to question everything you do. Why do you like what you like? Why did you say what you said? Why did you read this sentence? Was it because you chose to? Or because every neuron, every moment, every strand of probability was always leading you here? Maybe your life is a timeline that only ever had one shape. Or maybe it is a garden of forking paths, until you walk one, and then the rest disappear behind you like smoke. Even without time travel, the question persists. Neuroscientists have found that the brain often begins preparing decisions before we are consciously aware of making them. In some experiments, researchers can predict what choice a person will make seconds before the person knows it themselves. This does not mean we are robots, but it does suggest that consciousness may be more like a narrator than a commander, reporting on choices that have already been made deep in the mind's machinery. If true, that would make the sensation of free will a kind of post-game commentary, a useful illusion, a comforting story. And now time travel returns with a smug expression and says, "I told you so." Because if you can travel through time and cannot change anything important, because changing it would break consistency, then perhaps all of history is set. Not just the big events, but the small ones, the cheese, the park, the pine cone. That might sound bleak. But some find it oddly freeing. If everything is predetermined, then maybe guilt can loosen its grip. Maybe regret can rest. Maybe every decision, good or bad, was always going to be exactly what it was. You are not lost. You are on a path. You may not have chosen the trail, but you are still the one walking it. You still see the trees. You still feel the wind. The paradox is not here to steal your meaning. It is just here to ask whether that meaning comes from freedom or from the illusion of it. So what do you do with this idea? Do you rage against the script? Try to improvise? Or do you lean in? Do you say, If I was always going to read this paradox at midnight and feel existentially weird, then so be it. Maybe that is the paradox's secret. You can believe in free will while knowing that your belief was also pre-written. You can choose cheese while knowing that every atom of your being was nudging you toward dairy all along. Because even if you were destined to follow the path, that path still belongs to you. Now, before your mind decides to either stage a revolution or accept its predetermined bedtime, here is one final question to consider. If your future self already knows what you are going to have for breakfast, does that make your cereal a choice, or just a well-timed prophecy with extra fiber? The delayed choice paradox. When the future decides the past, the world is quiet. Your bed is warm. Your thoughts are sinking slowly, like marshmallows in hot cocoa. But just as your brain prepares to clock out for the night, a curious idea floats in from the ether and refuses to knock. What if the choice you make now can change what already happened? Welcome to the delayed choice paradox. It is a beautiful, frustrating, physics-flavored riddle where your future behavior retroactively alters the past. It is like placing your order at a restaurant and the chef changing what he already cooked for you 2 hours ago. Or picking a movie to watch, and the plot of your day suddenly rewriting itself based on your selection. And somehow, it is not just absurd, it is science. To understand the delayed choice paradox, you need to know about light. More specifically, photons. Tiny particles of light that seem simple until you stare at them too long and they start behaving like quantum stand-up comedians. Let us start with the famous double-slit experiment. Imagine you shine a beam of light at a wall with 2 slits. On the other side of the slits is a screen that records where the photons land. When no one observes which slit the photons go through, they act like waves. They create an interference pattern. A series of light and dark stripes on the screen that says, "I am a wave, and I have been everywhere at once." But if you add detectors to observe which slit each photon passes through, now they behave like particles. They go through one slit or the other. No interference, no wave pattern. Just 2 lumps on the screen, like an awkward mustache drawn by science. The mere act of observation changes how the photons behave. So far, so weird, but it gets weirder. In 1978, physicist John Wheeler asked a bold question. What if you wait to decide whether to observe the photon until after it has gone through the slits? In other words, you let the photon travel. It passes the slits. It is on its way to the screen. Only then, after it has already made its journey, you choose whether or not to observe which slit it went through. Here is the paradox. If you choose to observe, the interference pattern disappears, and the photon acts like a particle. If you do not observe, the interference pattern appears, and the photon acts like a wave. But your choice came after the photon passed the slits. It is like the photon went back in time, retrofitted its costume, and pretended it had always been a wave or a particle depending on what you decided. Your future choice changes the past behavior of the photon. That is the delayed choice paradox. It is not just spooky, it is existential. It tells us that reality is not fixed until a measurement happens, even if the thing being measured is in the past. This is where time travel fans lean in. Because if observation in the present can influence the behavior of a photon in the past, then maybe time is not a one-way street. Maybe the future and the past are in constant negotiation, whispering to each other behind the scenes like actors in a play who are still figuring out the ending. Now let us build a thought experiment. Imagine you are a time traveler. You go back in time to witness a mysterious event. Say, the creation of a famous painting. You hide in the corner. You do not interfere. You simply watch. Then you return to the present. Later, someone asks you whether the painter used a brush or a palette knife. You think for a moment. You remember seeing a brush. You describe it in detail. But what if your observation, even in memory, collapses the timeline? What if the painter had used a palette knife until your attention nudged reality into alignment with your recollection? What if your memory is the measurement that finalizes the past? This is the philosophical flavor of the delayed choice paradox. It suggests that the past is not fully written until it is observed, and the present moment is the quill. You are not just living in the now, you are sealing the envelope of history every time you open your eyes. Let us return to the quantum world for a moment. In modern versions of the delayed choice experiment, scientists have used clever setups involving mirrors, beam splitters, and quantum erasers. They fire individual photons into systems where the decision to observe their path is delayed until the last possible moment. In every case, the pattern that emerges depends on the future choice. No observation, interference. Observation, no interference. Reality waits. It does not commit. It shrugs politely and says, "Let me know what you decide, and I will pretend I have been doing that all along." Now let us stretch this idea beyond photons. Have you ever had a moment where you were unsure about something that happened until someone else asked about it? You thought you remembered, but you were not certain. Then you made a decision. You declared your version. You told the story. And suddenly, that version became the memory. What if that choice was your own version of a delayed measurement? What if your certainty created the past you now recall, the delayed choice? Paradox invites us to think of the universe not as a movie that plays forward frame by frame, but as a strange collaborative art project, where the brushstrokes arrive out of order and the signature is added before the painting is dry. It also raises uncomfortable questions. Is the past stable? Can it be rewritten? Are we constantly sculpting reality from both ends of time? In science fiction, this becomes fuel for wild stories. A detective solves a mystery by discovering that their future self planted the evidence. A scientist avoids a disaster by remembering something that never actually happened, until it suddenly did. But even in quiet, ordinary life, the paradox hums beneath the surface. It asks, are you remembering what happened, or are you defining what happened by the act of remembering? It challenges the idea of objective truth. It nudges the edges of history. It suggests that sometimes facts wait in the shadows for attention to bring them into focus. Maybe reality is less like a line and more like a quilt, not stitched together in order, but in patches. Some patches are old, some are new, and some only appear when you ask the right question. The delayed choice paradox tells us that cause and effect may not be as tidy as we thought. That time might not be a ruler, but a handshake. That the future and the past are old friends who still share secrets. Now, you might be wondering what this means for you, for your life, for your choices. It might mean that your awareness is more powerful than you realized. That what you notice, what you remember, what you decide to look at, all of it matters. Not just for the future, but for the past as well. Because maybe history is not made of stone. Maybe it is made of sand, waiting for the shape of your attention to decide which way it drifts. Now, before your brain ties itself into a bow made of particle probabilities, here is one final question to tuck into your timeline. If your future self chooses chocolate, and that choice causes your past self to crave it before dinner, does that make dessert a pre-existing condition or a retroactive snack attack? The chronology protection conjecture. When the universe locks the time travel door behind you, you are in bed. The world is hushed. Your brain is beginning to deflate like a balloon left in the sun. But just before sleep pulls the curtain, your mind throws one more idea onto the stage. What if the universe has a built-in security system that stops time travel before it gets messy? Welcome to the chronology protection conjecture. It is the cosmic version of a velvet rope and a very serious bouncer. It is the idea that the universe itself refuses to let time travel become a problem, especially the kind that messes with the past and creates paradoxes. In other words, the universe might be smarter than we are, or at least more cautious. The term chronology protection conjecture was coined by none other than Stephen Hawking. Yes, that Stephen Hawking. The one with the black holes and the best-selling books and the voice that made every scientific phrase sound like an intergalactic command. Hawking proposed that there might be a fundamental principle in physics that prevents time machines from working in a way that would allow someone to travel to the past and create a paradox. Something like a universal firewall, or a polite but firm sign that says, "Please do not tamper with the timeline. Violators will be gently erased." Let us take a stroll through the theory. First, a reminder. According to general relativity, the big theory Einstein cooked up when Newton's version of gravity started to seem a bit too friendly, it is technically possible to bend space-time. You can twist it, loop it, and, under certain conditions, create what physicists call closed time-like curves. That is a fancy term for time loops. Paths in space-time that start and end at the same point, just at different moments. Kind of like a racetrack for reality, where you can cross the finish line before the race starts. The problem? Once these loops exist, people get ideas, like going back in time to stop bad things from happening, or visiting their younger selves, or leaving mysterious notes in the past that somehow cause themselves to exist, like a cosmic version of writing your own prequel. But these scenarios create paradoxes. What if you prevent your own birth? What if you change an event that removes your reason for time traveling in the first place? What if the note you left in the past had no actual author because it came from a loop? Physics, as it turns out, does not appreciate these kinds of logical dead ends. This is where the chronology protection conjecture steps in. Hawking suggested that quantum effects, those tiny, jittery things that make up the universe when you zoom in too far, would conspire to destroy any would-be time machine the moment someone tries to use it to do something paradoxical. Not with explosions, not with flashing red lights, but subtly, quietly. With rising energy levels and infinite feedback loops that cause the structure of space-time to collapse before the time traveler ever gets the chance to interfere with the past. In short, the moment you try to do something naughty with time, the universe cancels your subscription. Think of it like this. You build a bridge through time. It looks solid. You step onto it. And just as you reach the middle, the bridge turns into mist, and you are right back where you started. No harm done. No paradox created. Just you and your disappointment. The theory is elegant. It allows the math of time travel to exist on paper, wormholes, time loops, all of it, but prevents those things from causing trouble in the real world. It is like theoretical physics saying, yes, you can draw a dragon, but no, you cannot bring it to life and let it loose in downtown traffic. Now let us imagine this in action. You invent a wormhole. You carefully place one end on your lab table and the other in the year 1975. You are ready. You have snacks. You have a speech prepared. You step in. But instead of emerging in a disco era filled with bell-bottoms and lava lamps, you find yourself stuck in a loop of electromagnetic feedback. The wormhole vibrates, the energy grows, the whole thing collapses in on itself like a souffle made of space-time. You sit on the floor, slightly singed, wondering if maybe the timeline just saved you from becoming your own grandfather. According to the chronology protection conjecture, this is not just bad luck. It is the universe doing its job. Now here is the strange part. We do not have definitive proof that the conjecture is true. It is, after all, a conjecture, a highly educated guess backed by serious math, respected physicists, and a healthy fear of time paradoxes. But so far, every time someone has tried to design a realistic time machine that allows backward time travel, something breaks. The equations go infinite. The energy requirements explode. The universe quietly says, no, thank you. And maybe that is the point. Maybe the laws of physics are not just guidelines. Maybe they are the narrative constraints of the universe itself. And maybe, just maybe, the timeline is protected because the story only works in one direction. Still, the idea of the universe protecting its chronology raises questions. If the past is off limits, then why is the future fair game? Why can we imagine traveling forward in time through cryogenics, near light speed travel, or suspended animation, but not back? And if we can never visit the past, does it still exist? Or is it like a deleted scene that only plays in memory? The chronology protection conjecture does not answer all of these questions. It simply puts up a polite velvet rope and says, please enjoy the ride in this direction only. But let us imagine a world where it did not exist. Time machines are everywhere. People are constantly going back to win the lottery, fix relationships, or tell their past selves to invest in fictional online coins. History becomes chaos. Entire cities vanish because someone stepped on the wrong butterfly. Dinosaurs reappear in Central Park because someone thought they would be a cool pet. In that world, reality would be unstable. Cause and effect would collapse into a pile of confused spaghetti. And free will? That would be a joke with very bad punchlines. So maybe chronology protection is not a limitation. Maybe it is a gift. A reminder that time, strange as it is, still follows a rhythm, that stories matter, that consequences matter, that some things are worth happening only once. And maybe the reason time moves forward is not because it must, but because it wants to. Now, before you start designing your own wormhole using kitchen appliances and leftover ambition, here is one last thought to bend your timeline gently. If the universe has built-in protection against time travel paradoxes, does that mean it is a sci-fi fan, or just really tired of cleaning up after humans with quantum ambitions and no sense of responsibility? Zeno's time travel paradox. When you can never quite get there, even if you already did, the night is calm. The world is still. Your eyelids are doing their best impression of heavy theater curtains. But just before the final act of sleep can begin, a single thought tiptoes across the stage and whispers, what if time travel is impossible? Not because of technology, but because motion itself is a lie. Welcome to Zeno's time travel paradox. This one is older than most paradoxes. Much older. It was born in ancient Greece, where a philosopher named Zeno of Elea decided that moving from one point to another was not as straightforward as it seemed. He was not trying to ruin bedtime, but he succeeded anyway. Zeno's paradoxes are not about time machines or wormholes or paradoxical billiard balls. No, they are quieter than that. They are about motion itself, about what it means to go somewhere, and what it means when you try to divide that journey into smaller and smaller pieces, until the pieces themselves start misbehaving. Let us start with the classic version. Imagine you want to walk across a room. You are on one side. A comfy chair is on the other. Your goal is to sit in that chair. Simple enough. But Zeno says, not so fast. First, you have to reach the halfway point. Then, you have to cover half the remaining distance. Then, you have to cover half of that distance. And half of that. And half of that. And so on. Every time you move forward, there is another halfway point waiting. You could keep dividing the distance forever. An infinite number of steps. And if you must complete an infinite number of tasks to get somewhere, then, according to Zeno, you never actually arrive. The chair remains unsat in. Your quest becomes eternal. You are the mythical hero of motion, doomed to approach without ever arriving. This is Zeno's paradox of dichotomy. And it sounds absurd. After all, you have walked across rooms before. Many times. You have reached chairs, you have sat. But the paradox is not about whether people move. It is about how we think about motion when we slice it too thin. It is about infinity and time and space, and how those things get along, or do not, when they are packed into a thought experiment. Now, here is where it gets time travel-y. Imagine a time traveler wants to reach a moment in the past. Let us say the year 1922. They program their machine. They press the button. The dials spin. And now, in Zeno's world, the machine must begin its journey. But before it can arrive at 1922, it must arrive at the halfway point, maybe 1971. Then it must reach halfway between 1971 and 1922, say 1946. Then halfway between 1946 and 1922. Then halfway again, and again. The machine finds itself caught in an infinite loop of halving the distance between itself and its destination. Each moment closer, but never there. According to Zeno, time travel to the past would require completing an infinite number of tasks in a finite time, and that, logically speaking, sounds a bit illegal. The paradox becomes, can you arrive at a moment in time if the journey requires you to pass through an infinite number of intermediate moments? Zeno says no, and while his tone is polite, his logic is firm. Now you might be thinking, this is nonsense. I have arrived in places before. I am very good at arriving. Sometimes I even arrive early. And you would be right, sort of. Mathematicians eventually resolved Zeno's paradox by explaining that an infinite series can have a finite sum. When you add 1/2 plus 1/4 plus 1/8 plus 1/16 and so on, the total approaches 1, not in some vague philosophical way, but in actual crunchable math. This means you can cover an infinite number of smaller and smaller distances in a finite time. You can cross the room, you can reach the chair, and in theory, you can travel to 1922, assuming your machine is not made of leftover toasters and Wi-Fi signals. But Zeno's real point was not about math. It was about how we understand motion. He was trying to show that our intuition about time and space might be flawed. That movement, when analyzed too closely, starts to behave like a magic trick. And if movement itself becomes questionable, then what happens to time travel? Time travel depends on motion through time. Whether you are zooming into the future or reversing into the past, you are still moving, still crossing a timeline, still passing moments. So if Zeno's reasoning holds, then you would have to pass through an infinite number of in-between moments to reach any particular time. And that is when the paradox tightens. Can you complete an infinite number of transitions to reach one moment? Is time made of discrete pieces like Lego bricks? Or is it a smooth river with no gaps, only flow? Physicists today lean toward smoothness. Space-time, according to Einstein, is a continuum, not a collection of chunks. But in the quantum world, the world of tiny particles and twitchy uncertainties, things get strange again. Some theories suggest that space and time might be quantized, that there is a smallest possible unit, like the Planck length or the Planck time, the tiniest possible thing that still counts as space or time. If that is true, then Zeno's paradox disappears. You cannot divide space forever, because there is a limit, a final chunk, a pixel on the screen of reality. But we do not know for sure. And even if time is pixelated at the quantum level, that still leaves us with the weird feeling Zeno planted. That motion, when overanalyzed, becomes suspicious. Imagine a time traveler stuck halfway to every decade, halfway to the 1980s, then halfway to the 1970s, then halfway to the halfway point, until the time machine becomes a paradoxical paperweight, vibrating in place like it cannot make up its mind. Zeno as time travel. Paradox is not about whether time travel works. It is about whether movement through time, when pushed to its limits, actually makes sense. And maybe that is what makes it special. Most time travel paradoxes are about action. Doing something, changing the past, getting stuck in a loop. But Zeno's is about arrival. It asks, can you even get there? And that question echoes beyond time travel. Can you ever really arrive at your goals? Or are you always closing the gap? Can you ever truly live in the present moment? Or are you always approaching it, one mental halfway point at a time? Maybe life itself is Zeno's paradox, a constant series of almosts, a graceful stumble toward completeness that never quite settles. But here is the twist. You still cross the room. You still reach the chair. You still live your life in all its glorious, unfinished halves. So maybe the paradox is not a wall. It is a mirror. It does not stop you. It just shows you how strange motion is, how curious time is, how everything you do, every step, every thought, every sleepy blink, happens between two infinities, one behind you, one ahead, and you, always moving forward. Now, before your brain decides to cut itself in half and then in half again until you dissolve into philosophical mist, here is one final question to roll around like a marble on the floor of reality. If a time traveler is always halfway to arriving and never actually arrives, does that make them fashionably late or just infinitely on the way to being punctual? The sleeping time traveler. When napping is basically time travel, but slower and with snoring. The night is peaceful. Your pillow is cooperating. Your breathing is steady. And just when your brain starts to slide gently into dreams, it asks the kind of question that only shows up when you are least prepared to answer. If I fell asleep and woke up in the future, does that count as time travel? Welcome to the paradox of the sleeping time traveler. This one is softer than most time travel paradoxes. No explosions, no paradoxical grandparents, no wormholes chewing on reality. Just one person, one nap, and one massive question about what it means to move through time. It is a paradox tucked under a blanket, clutching a cup of tea and quietly questioning the very fabric of the universe. Let us begin with something very relatable. Falling asleep. You close your eyes, you drift off, hours pass, your consciousness disappears for a while, then suddenly, alarm, light, awareness, you wake up. For you, it feels like a time jump, a blink. You went to sleep in one moment, and you opened your eyes in the future. Of course, the world kept spinning while you were out. Emails piled up, soup cooled. The cat made choices it regrets. But for your mind, the journey was seamless. You skipped over all the boring bits. This leads to the gentle, persistent question. If you experience a jump through time, but you do not age, participate, or remember anything in between, is that time travel? Some say yes, sort of. Technically, we are all traveling through time. 1 second per second. Always forward, always the same speed. But when you sleep, it feels different. More like you stepped into a tunnel and came out the other side with no memory of the walk. So the sleeping time traveler asks, what counts as real-time travel? Do you need a machine? A portal? A glowing blue vortex that hums ominously? Or is skipping time, even the slow way, enough? Now let us make it more dramatic. Imagine someone falls asleep in the year 2025 and wakes up in 2125. 100 years later, they have not aged. They look exactly the same. They were not frozen. They were just asleep. This person wakes up confused. The air smells like recycled optimism. Everything is made of glass and soft metals. People float on hover scooters and speak in polite algorithms. The sleeper stretches, yawns, and asks, what happened? For everyone else, time passed normally. But for the sleeper, time collapsed into a blink. They did not experience the decades. They were not part of the story. They simply skipped forward like a rock across a calm lake. That sounds suspiciously like time travel, and it raises some uncomfortable questions. What if time travel is not about jumping between points in time, but skipping over experiences? What if you can move through time faster than others? Not with a machine, but with stillness. This is where the paradox creeps in. The sleeping time traveler is both an active participant and a passive observer. They lived through the passage of time but did not experience it. They were there, but also not. They skipped the story, but woke up to the consequences. And that changes how we think about presence. Are you only part of the timeline if you are awake for it? Does skipping time erase your impact? Or does sleeping through a century count as presence, simply because your body existed while your mind was elsewhere? Now let us throw a twist into the blanket. What if someone chooses to sleep intentionally, just to avoid the present? This is not science fiction. It is the plot of several books, some space missions, and at least one person's very detailed retirement plan. The idea is simple. Sleep until the problem goes away. War, sleep through it. Debt, nap past it. Existential crisis, schedule a snooze that ends when someone else has figured it out. You are not changing the past. You are not creating paradoxes. You are simply choosing not to engage with the middle part of time. You set your alarm clock for when things are better. And that makes time travel look suspiciously like avoidance. But can avoidance change the future? Let us imagine two people. One lives every day. They age, make decisions, adapt, grow. The other skips 100 years by sleeping. When they wake up, the world is different. But so are they, at least to everyone else. They are a time capsule, a relic, a question mark wrapped in skin. The sleeping time traveler creates an emotional paradox. They left the world, but the world never left them. Their friends are gone. Their memories are outdated. Their references are useless. They say, "Do not worry, I saved a PDF," and everyone blinks in confusion. They are a visitor in their own future. And here is the twist. The longer they slept, the less they belong. Which raises the question, is time travel a way forward or a way out? Because sleeping through the decades might be a way to escape pain, confusion, or awkward small talk. But it also means missing out on joy, connection, and those little moments where nothing happens, but everything feels right. The paradox is that skipping time may help you survive, but it may also leave you behind. Now let us talk about relativity, not the family kind, the Einstein kind. According to Einstein's theory of special relativity, time moves differently depending on your speed. The faster you move, the slower time passes for you. If you were to hop on a spaceship and travel near the speed of light, then return to Earth, you would have aged less than everyone else. You would have leapt into the future. And that means time travel is already possible, just not convenient. But sleeping is a kind of mental version of that. You stay in place. The world moves faster. Not because physics changed, but because your perception disappeared. So maybe the sleeping time traveler is not just a paradox. Maybe they are the prototype. The first version of a time traveler. A person who discovered, by accident or design, that skipping ahead is possible without any fancy gear, just with silence. But then comes the hard part. Waking up. Because waking up is when all the skipped time hits you at once. You realize how much you missed, how much the world changed, how much you did not say. The buildings are taller. The menus have symbols you cannot read. The music sounds like soft robots arguing politely. And worst of all, your passwords have expired. You are in the future, but you are not of the future. Which brings us to the final twist. Maybe the paradox is not about skipping time. Maybe it is about rejoining it, because returning from a long sleep, whether a nap, a coma, or 100-year hibernation, requires something harder than closing your eyes. It requires choosing to be present, choosing to catch up, choosing to find your place in a story that moved on without you. And maybe that is the real time travel challenge. Not going forward, but arriving fully. Not waking up with your body, but with your mind. So the next time you close your eyes and drift into the foggy softness of sleep, remember, you are a time traveler in slow motion. And the future you land in will be just a little different because you were not watching. Now, before your own timeline slips into dreams, here is one final thought to gently wrinkle the sheets of your reality. If someone sleeps for 100 years and wakes up asking about their laundry, does that make them timeless, or just very behind on chores? The black hole time travel paradox. When falling into gravity's mouth might send you to tomorrow. The room is still. The world outside has gone quiet. Your blanket has achieved peak fluff. You are finally relaxed. And then, from the far corner of your mind, a thought sneaks in like a cat that learned how to open doors. What happens if I fall into a black hole? Could I time travel? Would I explode? Would I meet aliens who also made bad decisions? Welcome to the black hole time travel paradox. This one is less like a thought experiment and more like falling face first into a cosmic mystery box wrapped in gravity. Black holes are the drama queens of the universe, enormous, mysterious, and constantly sucking in attention, not to mention everything else. And somewhere in their chaotic core is a paradox that whispers, maybe the fastest way to tomorrow is straight through the belly of forever. Let us start with what a black hole is, just in case the last one you visited was disappointing. A black hole forms when a massive star dies and collapses in on itself. Gravity takes over, the mass shrinks, the density increases. Eventually, the gravitational pull becomes so strong that not even light can escape. That is why it is black. Not because it is shy, because the escape velocity is faster than light itself. At the heart of the black hole is a point called the singularity. That is where all the mass goes. It is not really a point. It is more like the place where the math gives up. An infinitely dense, infinitely small spot where the rules of physics go on vacation without telling anyone. Surrounding that singularity is the event horizon. The event horizon is the boundary, the point of no return. Once you pass it, you are in. Forever. No second chances. No, oops, I forgot my keys. Outside the event horizon, time still flows. Inside, time and space twist around like spaghetti made by a cosmic toddler. Now here is where the paradox begins to bubble. According to general relativity, time slows down near a black hole. The stronger the gravity, the slower time moves, at least from the perspective of someone far away. This is called gravitational time dilation. The closer you get to the event horizon, the more time drags its feet. If you were floating just outside the event horizon, a few minutes for you could be years for someone on Earth. That means, in a strange way, falling toward a black hole is like stepping into the future. Let us imagine a scenario. You are an astronaut, curious, ambitious, maybe slightly overconfident. You approach a supermassive black hole, not too close, just enough to experience the time dilation effect. You hover near the event horizon. You read a book, maybe eat a snack. Back on Earth, decades pass. Then you return. Only a few hours have passed for you, but everyone else has aged. The planet has changed. Music sounds different. People wear pants made of smart fabric. You are still wearing your original mission hoodie, and now it is considered retro. You have effectively time-traveled into the future. That part is not paradoxical. It is just physics doing what physics does. But now, imagine this. What if you do not just hover near the black hole? What if you fall in? From your point of view, you fall in normally. No big deal. You pass the event horizon. Time keeps moving for you. You get closer to the singularity. Gravity gets stronger. You begin to experience what physicists call spaghettification. Yes, that is the actual term. It means your body stretches out into a long, thin noodle because the gravity at your feet is stronger than the gravity at your head. It is gruesome. It is painful. It is not recommended as a method of transportation. But from the point of view of an outside observer, someone watching you fall into the black hole, something strange happens. They never actually see you cross the event horizon. To them, you slow down. Slower. Slower. You freeze in place, right at the edge. Your image becomes red-shifted, dimmer, stretched by the extreme gravity. Eventually, you fade from view. From their perspective, you are stuck at the edge of the black hole forever, never quite falling in. And here is the paradox. From your perspective, you already fell in. From theirs, you never quite did. Both are correct. Because in relativity, time is not absolute. It depends on where you are, what you see, how fast you are moving. In this case, you and the observer disagree about a very basic question. Did the fall happen? You say yes. They say not yet. And both of you are right. This is not just philosophical. It creates real problems. If you send a message back from inside the event horizon, assuming you could, no one would receive it. The gravity is too strong. The signal would never escape. So to the outside world, you have vanished. But in your world, you are still falling. It is like writing a diary while sinking into the sea, knowing no one will ever read it, but still feeling like your story is unfolding. Now let us add more spice. Some physicists believe that inside certain black holes, time and space switch roles. That means the singularity is not just a place, it becomes a moment you cannot avoid. No matter how you try to move, you are moving toward it. It is not a location you can steer around. It is your future. And that raises a question. If space becomes time and time becomes space, are you still falling into a place? Or are you simply moving forward in a direction that cannot be paused? This turns the black hole into a one-way ticket through time, a tunnel with no return. But wait, some theories go even further. What if the black hole is not just a prison, but a portal? Some scientists believe that black holes might be connected to other parts of space-time through something called a wormhole. Theoretical tunnels that connect distant points in space, or maybe even time. That means falling into a black hole could potentially send you somewhere else entirely. Another galaxy, another timeline, another version of reality where chairs have 6 legs and people communicate through interpretive dance. But here is the problem. Wormholes are unstable. They collapse quickly. They require exotic matter to stay open, stuff with negative energy and zero chill. We have not found this exotic matter. We are not even sure it exists. So the idea that black holes could function as time machines remains speculative. Beautiful, mysterious, but speculative. And here is the final twist. If black holes can lead to other times or places, and if people fall in and never return, then where do their stories go? Do they become time ghosts? Do they live out new futures in unreachable corners of the cosmos? Or do they simply stretch into eternity, half seen at the edge of gravity's darkest heart? The black hole time travel paradox is not just about physics. It is about perspective, about how two people can witness the same event and disagree on what happened, about how time stretches, bends, and occasionally does the splits. It is about how something can both happen and not happen, depending on who is watching. And maybe, in the end, the black hole is just a cosmic metaphor for every unanswered question. Deep, dense, impossible to escape once you start falling in. Now, before your thoughts get stretched into philosophical spaghetti and served with a side of confusion, here is one final question to quietly pull the universe's curtain. If falling into a black hole lets you time travel, but you never come back to tell anyone, does that make you an explorer, a noodle, or just really bad at round trips? The quantum time travel paradox. When particles ignore the rules, and so should you. You are in bed. The lights are low. Your body is relaxing like a warm cookie left in the sun. And then your brain, that enthusiastic little mischief maker, decides this is the perfect time to whisper, "What if quantum particles can time travel and never tell us?" Welcome to the quantum time travel paradox. This is the paradox that shows up wearing lab goggles, holding an equation it will never explain, and softly humming to itself in the language of probability. It is smaller than a breadcrumb, faster than light, and somehow more confusing than your tax forms. But it might be the key to understanding how time travel works, or why it might already be happening right under our noses. Let us start small, really small. Quantum physics is the science of the very tiny. Particles, atoms, photons. The stuff reality is made of when you zoom in so far that even common sense starts to feel uncomfortable. And in this realm, time gets weird. Like, I wore 2 socks yesterday and now one of them is a probability cloud. Weird. The quantum time travel paradox asks, what happens when particles, those minuscule bundles of matter and energy, start breaking the rules we thought were solid? Because in the quantum world, everything is possible until it is measured. Reality is not fixed. It is a swirling soup of maybes. And sometimes, just sometimes, the soup flows backward. Let us imagine a particle. We will call it blip. Blip is a quantum particle with very little respect for your timeline. One moment, blip is here. The next, it is there. You try to measure it, and it politely refuses to have one answer. It might be spinning this way or that way. It might exist in 2 places at once. It might be caught between yes and no like a cat that cannot decide if it wants to go outside. Now here is where it gets interesting. Some quantum models suggest that blip does not just move forward in time. It might also travel backward. not in a dramatic DeLorean-style explosion, but subtly, quietly, like rewinding a second of reality without anyone noticing. This is not science fiction. It is rooted in actual quantum theory. In particular, there is a concept called retrocausality. That is the idea that future events might influence the past, not just in movies or dreams, but in real physical systems. Blip might make a decision now based on something that has not happened yet. It is like quantum foreshadowing, except the story has not been written. Here is an example. In a type of experiment called delayed choice, a particle behaves one way if you decide to measure it a certain way, and another if you do not. But the twist is this: your decision to measure can happen after the particle already passed through the setup. It is like deciding whether to turn the hallway light on after your friend already walked down the hall, and your choice somehow changes whether they saw wallpaper or a brick wall. Retroactively. No one panics. The math just smiles politely and asks if you want a nap. Now take that concept and aim it at time travel. What if particles are already slipping through time loops? What if, instead of moving in straight lines, they are constantly bouncing off the walls of past and future like confused pinballs? Some physicists have modeled this. They ask, what if a particle could go back in time and interact with itself? Maybe it sends a message. Maybe it corrects its course. Maybe it just high-fives its past self and leaves. In one model, known as the closed time-like curve model, this is entirely possible. The universe allows it, as long as no paradoxes are created. That means if the particle wants to send a message to its past self, it can, but only if that message was always going to happen. Let us say Blip decides to warn its past self not to collide with another particle. It does so. The past Blip avoids the collision, but that means the future Blip never had a reason to send the warning. That is a paradox. So instead, Blip only sends the warning if the warning was already part of the loop. The message exists because it always did. The timeline remains consistent. Confusing? Yes. Logical? Sort of. Mind-bending? Absolutely. And this brings us to the paradox. If particles can move through time, influence themselves, and resolve paradoxes by becoming part of the story, what does that mean for you? You, the very large particle made of trillions of smaller particles. Are you also caught in a loop? Are your decisions shaped by events that have not happened yet? Is your intuition just quantum retrocausality dressed as a gut feeling? Maybe you reached this paragraph not by chance, but because your future self needed you to. Quantum time travel does not just mess with motion. It messes with causality, with identity, with the very idea that the past causes the future. Because in this model, the future can cause the past just as easily. Imagine you drop your keys. A second later, you feel uneasy. Then you find out the drop happened because you were distracted by something you had not seen yet. Maybe a flash of light, maybe a strange sound. The cause came after the effect, and yet, it all feels right. This is the paradox of the quantum time traveler, that you might already be reacting to events before they occur, not because you are psychic, because at the quantum level, time does not play fair. And here is the twist: you cannot notice it directly. That is the frustrating beauty of quantum time travel. You cannot use it to win the lottery. You cannot build a machine out of spoons and wishful thinking. You cannot escape consequences, because the timeline closes itself. Any message from the future must already be part of the past. Any action you take must already be baked into reality. You cannot change the world. You can only play the role you were always going to play. It is fate, written in probabilities and particle paths. So what is the point? Why care about quantum time travel if it does not let you change anything? Because it changes you. It reminds you that time is not a straight line, that your choices echo in both directions, that every decision you make might be a response to a whisper from the future you have not met yet. It makes the present feel less like a moment and more like a crossroads where past and future shake hands and pretend not to recognize each other. And maybe that is the secret. Maybe you are not meant to control time. Maybe you are meant to notice its texture, its wrinkles, its loops. Because even if time travel remains theoretical, the paradox still lingers. Particles might already be slipping through cracks in the timeline. And you, yes, you are made of those particles. So the next time you feel like you have been here before, like you know what someone will say, or like your decisions are strangely familiar, do not panic. It might just be quantum déjà vu. Now, before your thoughts start oscillating between every possible version of reality, here is one final question to keep your particles entertained. If a particle travels back in time to stop itself from sneezing and accidentally starts the Big Bang instead, does that make it clumsy, brilliant, or just really bad at following instructions? The Energy Conservation Paradox. When time travel breaks the universe's favorite rule. The lights are off. Your pillow is finally cooperating. The blanket is doing its job without judgment. And then your brain, because it likes to ruin its own relaxation, asks, if I traveled through time, would I be adding extra energy to the universe, or just confusing it? Welcome to the Energy Conservation Paradox. This one does not need paradoxical twins or murderous grandparents. It just needs you, a time machine, and the universe's #1 obsession, balance. The universe loves balance. It likes things to be neat, tidy, and, most of all, conserved. Mass, energy, momentum. It keeps track of everything, like the accountant of all reality. So when time travel comes stomping in wearing boots and quantum confidence, the universe starts sweating. Let us begin with the law in question. The law of conservation of energy says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change forms. A sandwich becomes heat, movement, and maybe regret. A battery powers a flashlight, which becomes light and warmth, and that strange humming noise it always makes. But the total amount of energy? Still the same. This law is sacred. It is the reason stars shine, pendulums swing, and microwaves ruin leftovers in exactly the same way every time. Physics treats it like a golden rule. Now let us break it. Imagine you have a time machine. You step into it holding a flashlight. You press the button. You travel 5 minutes into the past. Now there are two of you in that moment. The original you and the time-traveled you. Each holding the same flashlight, each burning the same batteries, each occupying the same space. You just duplicated energy. Poof. Double the photons, double the potential. One timeline, now hosting a guest version of yourself, and both of you brought snacks. From the perspective of physics, that is a problem. You just added energy to the universe. You brought back a fully formed human, clothes included, with calories, kinetic energy, and unfinished thoughts. And unless something else was destroyed to compensate, the energy total went up, which means the conservation law was violated. Physics does not like that. Some might argue, well, what if the time machine uses up an equivalent amount of energy when it operates? But that only solves part of the problem, because the person from the future is not just energy. They are mass, information, intention, and worst of all, memories from the future that should not exist in the past. So the paradox is not just physical, it is also logical. By adding yourself to the past, you change the energy content of that moment, and that change must either be offset by an equal and opposite loss elsewhere, or be accepted by the universe with a resigned sigh and a shrug. Now let us make it worse. What if you traveled back once, then did it again? 5 versions of you running around the same afternoon, all ordering coffee, all using oxygen, all trying not to bump into each other. At this point, the local energy budget is in crisis. You are no longer a time traveler. You are a walking energy duplication glitch. Every version of you is pulling from the same timeline, like someone trying to microwave 10 dinners at once, using one plug socket and a dangerous amount of optimism. Physics wants a refund. This is where some physicists start panicking and others start smiling, because paradoxes like this are not just problems. They are invitations to get creative. One proposed solution is that time travel is only possible if it obeys a kind of global conservation. That means if you add energy to one moment in time, you must subtract it from another. So if you go back in time and add yourself to 3:42 p.m., then maybe you disappear from 3:43 p.m. in the original timeline. The overall energy is preserved. Nothing gained, nothing lost, just shuffled. But that still feels awkward. It is like saying, yes, I duplicated myself, but I disappeared later, so it all evens out. It might be true, but it sounds suspiciously like something someone would say after borrowing your car and returning it with more dents and less gas. Another proposed idea is that time travel always splits into parallel universes. You step into the past, but you are not adding energy to your own universe. You are adding it to a copy, a separate timeline, a new track on the cosmic playlist. The conservation law still applies within each universe, but your arrival in a new one is part of a bigger multiverse that does not mind having extra versions of you. Of course, that solution creates more questions. How many universes are there? Can you take things with you? Is there a version of you in every universe asking the same question right now? And if so, are they also wearing pajamas and wondering if they left the stove on? But let us bring it back to basics. The energy conservation paradox matters because it forces us to confront something we usually take for granted. The idea that reality does not just keep receipts, it balances the books. Every action, every spark, every stretch of a muscle has a cost, a transfer, a response. Time travel breaks that rhythm. When you show up early, again, with full calories and functioning organs, you are cheating the balance sheet. You are a loan that was not accounted for, and physics is not a fan of debt. Now let us look at another angle. What if time travel is possible but only in a closed loop? That means you were always going to appear in the past. Your presence there was already part of history. You did not add anything. You simply fulfilled what was already written. This solution is popular among philosophers and headache-prone scientists. It means that time travel does not break energy conservation because there was never a duplication. You were always in the past. Your energy was already there. The loop is tidy, no duplication, no extra weight. But that raises its own issues. If everything is already part of a loop, then do you really have free will? Did you choose to time travel, or were you always going to do it? And more importantly, if you were always in the past, why did you not leave a note? Time travel, at its core, seems to want something that physics does not allow, to bend the rules without consequences. But energy does not like being bent. It likes being counted, tracked, and respected. And that is what makes this paradox powerful. It reminds us that every journey across space or time costs something. Maybe the universe does allow time travel, but only if it can charge you for it. Maybe every leap through time comes with an energy invoice. And maybe, just maybe, the reason we have not met future time travelers is because they looked at the price tag and decided to walk. Now, before your thoughts spin into loops and try to calculate whether dreaming counts as low-energy time travel, here is one final question to gently short-circuit the cosmic calculator. If every time traveler adds energy to the past, does that mean the universe charges late fees? Or just quietly includes them in your cosmic utility bill with no explanation? The horizon problem and time travel. When the universe cannot explain why it matches its own wallpaper, you are stretched out, relaxed, and your brain is starting to float like a balloon in warm soup. Just as sleep begins to lift you into its soft, comforting mist, a thought bumps against your forehead and refuses to leave. Why does the universe look the same in every direction, even though the parts have never spoken to each other? Welcome to the horizon problem. It is one of the biggest, weirdest puzzles in cosmology, and somehow, it may be connected to time travel. Because when the universe behaves like it coordinated outfits without ever having a group chat, someone has to ask if there is time trickery involved. Let us begin with the basics. Look up at the sky, or at least imagine doing that, because you are in bed and no one expects you to get up. The night sky is filled with the faint glow of cosmic microwave background radiation, the afterglow of the Big Bang. It is the oldest light we can detect, like a baby photo of the universe taken when it was only 380,000 years old. Here is the strange thing. That light looks nearly identical in every direction. The temperature is almost exactly the same. Only tiny variations exist. This might not sound exciting until you realize that some of those regions of space are so far apart that, according to regular physics, there has never been enough time for them to exchange information. No signals, no heat, no polite introductions, nothing. And yet they are the same. This is like walking into a room where two people on opposite sides are wearing the exact same outfit, speaking the same sentence, and blinking in sync, even though they have never met and were never told what to do. It is unsettling. It is suspicious. It is the horizon problem. Now, the standard explanation is something called cosmic inflation. Inflation says that in the first trillionth of a second after the Big Bang, the universe expanded faster than the speed of light. Everything was squeezed close together, had time to chat, and then, poof, it stretched out like cosmic taffy. That would explain the uniformity. Everyone started in the same room before being flung to opposite corners. But some physicists are not satisfied. They wonder if something else could be going on. That is where time travel strolls in. What if information has been passed between these regions of the universe, not by proximity, but by bending time? Maybe some form of matter, energy, or exotic time-traveling photon, carried information back and forth between regions that should never have met. Maybe the early universe allowed for causal loops, time skips, or other tricks that let distant zones synchronize their clocks before drifting apart forever. This idea might sound strange, but in the world of quantum mechanics and general relativity, strange is practically a job requirement. Now let us imagine a scene. Two regions of space, unimaginably far apart, are sitting there in the early universe. They are just clouds of energy, minding their own business. Suddenly, a ripple in space-time appears. A loop, a shortcut, a wrinkle. Information from one region zips through the loop, lands in the other, and tells it, "Hey, let us both settle at exactly 2.725 Kelvin. Trust me." The second region agrees. The loop closes. The ripple vanishes. The universe continues expanding. And billions of years later, we look out with our telescopes and wonder, why do they match? Enter the horizon problem time travel paradox. If time loops were responsible for this cosmic coordination, then we are left asking, where did the information come from? Did one region invent the pattern? Was it copied? Was it always part of a self-consistent time loop that had no beginning? This becomes eerily similar to other time travel paradoxes we know and love. The self-creating book. The time traveler who hands their past self the blueprints to the time machine, the note that exists because it tells itself to exist. If the uniformity of the universe is caused by time-traveling information, then we are staring at a causal loop the size of everything. And that is the paradox. A loop without a source. A message with no author. A cosmic dress code that no one remembers agreeing to. Now let us zoom in from the universe to something more familiar. Your bedroom. Imagine waking up to find your walls perfectly painted in identical shades of beige, even though you remember painting each one with a different color. Somehow, overnight, the paint rebalanced itself to match. You check your brush, you check your memory. Nothing explains it. You are left with two options. 1. Something reset everything in a moment of coordinated effort. 2. Someone came back in time with a paintbrush and an attitude. The horizon problem makes us question what counts as communication. Does it require proximity, or can the universe share messages through shortcuts in time itself? Inflation theory works well. It is widely accepted. But it does not answer the deeper question. Why did the universe inflate that way? What started it? What guided the process? Some physicists believe that only a theory that unifies quantum mechanics and gravity, something we have not fully discovered yet, can explain it. Others believe that the early universe may have had very different rules. rules that allowed brief windows of time-looping behavior, echoes, back-and-forth whispers that shaped the way space evolved. That would mean the very structure of the cosmos, the reason galaxies are distributed the way they are, the reason the universe is smooth and balanced, might be the result of a giant, invisible paradox humming in the background. It would also mean that time, in its earliest moments, was not a one-way street. It was a loop, a swirl, a tangle of spaghetti that somehow unraveled into a clean, expanding map of stars and dust. And if time was not linear at the start, maybe it never really became linear at all. Maybe our experience of time moving forward is just one slice of a larger, stranger shape, a timeline with folds, pockets, feedback. Maybe we are still caught in that loop, unable to see it from our narrow perch. And maybe, just maybe, those identical patches of the universe are not separate at all. Maybe they are connected in ways we cannot yet detect. A thread of time looping backward and forward across light years, stitching space together like a cosmic quilt with matching corners. So, what does all of this mean for time travel? It means time travel might not be limited to people, machines, or awkward conversations with your past self. It might be something the universe itself uses, quietly, to keep its story consistent, to balance itself, to match its wallpaper before guests arrive. And it means that paradoxes are not just problems. They might be the operating system of the cosmos. Now, before your brain begins trying to calculate the temperature of interstellar paint and whether causality can be recycled, here is one final question to let your thoughts spiral gently. If the universe solved its symmetry problem by sending information back in time, does that make it brilliant, suspicious, or just the kind of neighbor who coordinates their furniture before asking why you are staring at the wall? The Fermi paradox and time travel, when aliens are late, because they took a detour through time. You are lying in bed, the lights are off, the fan is making that perfect, hypnotic whirring sound. Your breathing slows, your brain says, shh. But just before you drift into that soft cosmic jelly known as sleep, your inner philosopher leans over and asks, if the universe is so big, so old and so full of stars, where is everybody? Welcome to the Fermi Paradox. It is a simple, haunting question. Given how massive the universe is and how many Earth-like planets should be out there, why have we not seen a single alien? No signals, no spacecraft, no glowing green tourists taking blurry selfies next to the pyramids. Statistically, aliens should be everywhere, and yet they are not. Or at least, they are not showing up to our planet's dinner party. So physicists, astronomers, and people with too much free time have spent decades coming up with theories. Maybe intelligent life is rare. Maybe it destroys itself. Maybe aliens are shy, quiet, or just really bad at directions. But there is another possibility, one that twists the Fermi paradox into a new shape. What if aliens are not missing in space, but in time? What if the reason we have not seen them is because they are either too early or too late? This brings us to the intersection of the Fermi paradox and time travel. Let us start with the basics. The observable universe is around 93 billion light-years wide and nearly 14 billion years old. That is a lot of space and a lot of time for life to pop up, build spaceships, make bad decisions, and accidentally invent cosmic microwave popcorn. But even if just a fraction of those stars have habitable planets, and even if just a tiny number of those develop intelligent life, there should still be thousands, maybe millions, of civilizations. They should be out there, sending signals, exploring, bumping into us at cosmic gas stations. But they are not. So maybe they did exist, just not now. Maybe aliens visited Earth millions of years ago when our planet was nothing but a sweaty rock covered in soup and ambition. Maybe they scanned it, shrugged, and moved on. No pyramids, no Wi-Fi, no reason to stay. Or maybe they are still coming. Maybe they will arrive in 1,000,000 years, after we are long gone. They will find our fossilized billboards and ancient leftovers and ask, what was a hot pocket? The Fermi paradox makes us ask, is it possible that we are not alone in the universe, but simply out of sync. This is where time travel sneaks into the story. Imagine an alien civilization so advanced it can manipulate time. It does not just travel through space, it folds time like a cosmic bedsheet. It skips ahead, it loops back. It explores not just planets, but eras. Why would it do this? Maybe to avoid hostile civilizations. Maybe to observe the past without interfering. Maybe because it invented time travel before it invented patience. Now let us imagine Earth from the perspective of one of these time-hopping aliens. It sees our planet's history not as a straight line, but as a series of interesting pit stops. It visits the Jurassic period, avoids the asteroid, then pops into medieval Europe to watch people argue about spices. Maybe it even visits your future kitchen to figure out why humans thought ketchup went with everything. But here is the twist. If time travel exists and aliens are using it, they may never need to contact us. They might observe our entire timeline from a safe distance, learning everything they need without ever saying hello. They would be the ultimate lurkers. And that would mean the silence we hear, the apparent absence of intelligent life, could be an illusion. We may be surrounded by observers, by advanced beings drifting along the edges of our timeline, studying us the way someone watches a documentary with subtitles and a snack. And if that is true, then the Fermi paradox is not a question. It is a misunderstanding. Now let us get even weirder. What if we are the time travelers? What if future humans, thousands or millions of years from now, evolve into something unrecognizable, physically or technologically, and begin exploring their own past? We often think of aliens as something other. But what if they are just us, stretched by time and curiosity? They would already know our history. They might even be part of it. They could be the strange figures in ancient art, the unexplained sightings, the reason your dog sometimes stares at the corner like it sees something you cannot. It would be poetic. The universe is quiet because we are the only ones here. But we are never truly alone because our future selves are always watching. Let us bring this back to practical questions. If time travel is real and civilizations can master it, then how do they avoid creating paradoxes? How do they stop themselves from accidentally stepping on a butterfly and turning an entire planet into nothing but sentient moss? This is where the Novikov self-consistency principle enters the room like a calm librarian. It says that time travel may be possible, but only if it does not create contradictions. You can go back, but you cannot change what has already happened. Every action you take was already part of the timeline. So if aliens are visiting Earth's past, or our future, they are not changing anything. They are fulfilling history. They are quiet puzzle pieces that always fit, even if we do not see the full picture. This keeps the timeline clean, and it keeps the Fermi paradox intact. Because it means advanced civilizations might be everywhere, doing everything, without disrupting anything. Which is a little frustrating. We want flying saucers. We want galactic conferences. We want at least one alien podcast. Instead, we get silence. But maybe that silence is not emptiness. Maybe it is restraint. Maybe the more advanced a civilization becomes, the less noise it makes. Maybe the quiet is the answer. Now here is another angle. If aliens exist and time travel is possible, then maybe they are using it not to explore us, but to escape us. Maybe we are the loud neighbors. Maybe our broadcasts, our wars, our music, our reality shows were enough to convince a distant species to rewind, fast forward, or skip this chapter entirely. Ah, yes, they say, the humans, let us not. This brings us full circle to the real heart of the Fermi paradox. It asks not just where aliens are, but what kind of species we are. It holds up a mirror and says, if you existed elsewhere, would you want to meet you? Time travel adds a new layer. It suggests that even if the stars are full of life, we might be locked in our own temporal bubble, waving into the dark, while countless civilizations peek in and decide to stay behind the curtain. Maybe they are waiting. Maybe they already came. Maybe they will arrive tomorrow and act surprised when we pretend we did not expect them. Or maybe they already left, unimpressed by our lack of universal Wi-Fi. Now, before your thoughts start spinning backward through your own timeline and wondering whether your childhood goldfish was an extraterrestrial tourist in disguise, here is one final question to leave hanging in the cosmic void. If aliens are traveling through time to avoid us, does that make them advanced, or just incredibly punctual introverts? The Multiverse Lottery Paradox, when every version of you wins and loses at the same time. The lights are off. The night is quiet. Your bed has wrapped itself around you like a loyal pet, and you are almost asleep. Almost. But then your brain perks up and asks, what if there are infinite versions of me, and one of them just won the lottery, while another was bitten by a very judgmental goose? Welcome to the Multiverse Lottery Paradox. This is what happens when you take time travel, sprinkle in quantum physics, and stir it all together with the cosmic spoon of infinite possibilities. It is about chance, it is about identity, and it is about how reality might be less like a straight line and more like a tree with severe indecision issues. Let us start with the multiverse. In some interpretations of quantum mechanics, especially the many worlds interpretation, every time a quantum event could have more than one outcome, the universe splits. Not just metaphorically, literally. You flip a coin, heads in one universe, tails in another. You have toast in one. You spill juice in another. You sneeze and miss your train in one. You sneeze and accidentally discover a new species of pigeon in another. Each decision branches reality into a new version of itself. Now multiply that across every person, every action, every particle. Congratulations. You now have an infinite number of universes, some almost identical, some wildly different, some where the laws of physics wear funny hats. So what does this have to do with time travel? Everything. Because in a multiverse, time travel does not just move you through your own timeline. It could launch you into a different one altogether. Say you go back in time and buy a lottery ticket. You choose the same numbers you remember from the winning ticket in your original timeline. You wait. The numbers are drawn. You grin. But they are different. In this timeline, someone else won. That is the paradox. Time travel in a multiverse does not guarantee outcomes. You may remember winning. You may remember getting it all exactly right. But the universe you are in now is not the one you came from. It is a sibling, a cousin, a universe with similar furniture, but a different sense of humor. And that makes the past more of a suggestion than a guarantee. Now let us flip the coin again. What if there is a version of you, just one out of infinite versions, that actually did win the lottery? They guessed every number, bought the ticket on a whim. Now they live in a marble mansion shaped like a platypus. You, however, are in bed, broke, awake, thinking about paradoxes. But if that other version exists, should you feel happy for them? Or annoyed? Because technically, they are you. Just not this you, a statistically adjacent you, a you that drifted left while you drifted right. And that brings us to the emotional core of the paradox. In a multiverse, everything happens. Every possible version of every event plays out. There is a version of you who never forgot your homework, a version who became president of a small but enthusiastic island, a version who learned to juggle and never stopped. Which one is the real you? All of them? None of them? Just the one thinking about it right now? If you can time travel to another branch of the multiverse and meet a version of yourself, what would you say? Would you compete? Would you collaborate? Would you apologize for how weird you look when you concentrate? And more importantly, what if that version wants to switch places? Imagine you are the regular mid-tier you. You have laundry, questionable leftovers, and an unpaid parking ticket. And suddenly, wealthy timeline. You shows up in a glowing portal, steps out, and says, I am exhausted from all this success. Want to swap for a bit? You nod before they finish the sentence. But the moment you step into their life, the problems begin. Their dog does not like you. Their espresso machine has buttons you cannot understand. And worst of all, They forgot to mention the televised interview happening in 4 minutes. Now the paradox kicks in. If multiverse versions of you can trade places, does that change anything in your own timeline? Do your choices still matter? Or are you just one leaf on a tree that already has a billion alternatives? It gets trickier. Say you go back in time to stop yourself from making a mistake. You succeed. But the moment you do, you split the timeline. Now there are 2 branches, one where the mistake happened, and one where it did not. You are in the second one. Things look better. Your past self is grateful, but your original self, the one who traveled back, is still carrying the memory of the old timeline. You are a refugee from an abandoned branch. You do not belong anywhere. Now you live in a world you improved, but never truly experienced. And that is the paradox. Did you actually fix the mistake? Or just outsource it to a different universe? Did you create a better reality? Or just run away from the original? In the lottery version of the paradox, this becomes almost funny. Imagine buying infinite tickets across infinite timelines, knowing that one of you will win. Now imagine every version of you showing up to collect the prize at the same time. The lottery office collapses into a sea of plaid shirts and mild disappointment. Each winner is real, each claim is valid, but none of them belong in the same universe. So the system breaks. And reality has to pick one. That leads us to the core issue of the multiverse lottery paradox. When every outcome happens, what is the value of any single one? Does success mean anything if failure also exists elsewhere? Does regret matter if some version of you got it right? Or is life just a buffet of choices, and you only get to taste one dish? The multiverse does not answer these questions. It just smiles, multiplies itself, and offers another branch. But here is a comforting thought. Even if infinite versions of you exist, you are the only one here. You are the only one seeing this version of the world, feeling these thoughts, stretching your toes under this particular blanket. That makes your perspective unique, even in an endless forest of almost yous. And maybe that is enough. Now, before your thoughts branch off into several equally confusing directions and start debating each other in quantum French, here is one final question to tie it all together. If every version of you exists in the multiverse, and one of them marries a billionaire, another becomes a time traveler, and another is arrested for illegal cheese smuggling, does that make your current life the safe option, or just the one without lactose? The parallel universe paradox. When you might be next door to yourself and neither of you returns the lawnmower. You are lying in bed. The blanket has molded perfectly to your shape. Your mind is slowing, drifting into the quiet fog of sleep. And just as your brain finally sighs and leans toward dreams, a little voice in the back of your head pipes up and says, "What if there is another universe just like this one? But in that version, I actually remembered to reply to that email from last week." Welcome to the parallel universe paradox. This one is not just strange, it is personal. Because it suggests that every version of you might be out there somewhere, doing better, doing worse, or just doing the same things but in a slightly different outfit. It is the cosmic equivalent of walking into a room and feeling like someone who looks exactly like you just left through the other door. Parallel universes, also known as alternate realities, mirror worlds, or timelines where your socks always match, are theoretical versions of our universe that exist alongside our own. They may share the same laws of physics, they may not. Some might be eerily familiar, others might be made of marshmallows and regrets. The idea has been around for a while, poking philosophers and physicists alike. It is one of those concepts that manages to be completely unprovable and yet totally irresistible, especially if you have ever blamed your mistakes on someone who probably exists in another timeline. Now let us take a closer look at what makes the parallel universe paradox so paradoxical. First, imagine a multiverse, a vast, infinite collection of universes, all coexisting like pages in an invisible book. In one universe, you are reading this chapter. In another, you skipped it. In a third, you are the one who wrote it. And in a fourth, you never even learned to read because language was replaced by interpretive dance sometime around the year 1342. In many interpretations of quantum physics, every possible outcome of every possible event happens in some parallel universe. You turn left instead of right? New universe. You eat cereal instead of toast? New universe. You decide to grow a mustache just to confuse your friends? There is a universe where that mustache is now president. So here is where the paradox begins to form. If parallel universes exist, and if every possible version of every choice branches into its own reality, then all those versions of you also think they are the real you. Each one believes it is the original. Each one thinks it is in the main timeline, and none of them knows about the others. And that means the very concept of being you becomes a bit slippery. You are not a single thread in the fabric of the universe. You are a knot in a pile of nearly identical threads, each one shouting, "I am the real one," while wearing a slightly different pair of shoes. Now let us mix in time travel. Imagine someone invents a time machine and uses it to travel backward. But instead of arriving in their own past, they land in a nearly identical universe. It looks like their past. It smells like their past. But it is off by one detail. The cat is left-handed. The forks have 3 prongs. Someone in the background is humming the theme to a TV show that never existed in their timeline. That traveler cannot go home. They are stuck in a universe that looks like theirs, but is not. The people are the same, but the memories do not match. The coffee tastes different. The calendar is off by a day. It is like waking up in a dream that refuses to admit it is dreaming. Now that traveler faces a paradox. If parallel universes are so close to our own, how can you ever know if you are in the right one? And worse, what if you never were? What if the universe you remember was just one of many, and the one you are in now is close enough to fool you? The parallel universe. Paradox asks, what if your memories are loyal, but your surroundings are not? This becomes especially tricky when we think about identity. If there are infinite versions of you, each one taking a slightly different path, then who is the real you? The one who succeeded? The one who failed? The one who moved to Iceland and became a marmot whisperer? And if time travel lets you visit these universes, would you recognize yourself? Would you like yourself? Would you immediately challenge yourself to a dance battle? Now imagine you bring something back from one of those universes. A book, a phone, a sandwich that tastes suspiciously like enlightenment. You just crossed timelines. You just introduced an object from Universe A into Universe B. Now both universes are technically contaminated. This raises a question. If parallel universes are sealed systems, does moving between them create a paradox? Does the act of travel itself split more universes? Or does the multiverse just shrug and create a new branch with each crossing? Physicists are not sure. Some say parallel universes are totally disconnected. Others say they overlap. Some believe they bump into each other, like bubbles in a cosmic bath. And a few suggest they can influence each other, subtly, like whispers through very thick walls. So let us bring it down to bedtime terms. Imagine every time you make a choice, big or small, the universe splits. Now there are millions of you, each one walking through their own version of the day. One of you missed the bus and found a $20 bill. Another caught the bus and had to sit next to a stranger who smelled like pickles and regret. Another version of you never even left the house and instead became really into indoor mushroom farming. All of them are valid. All of them are you. The paradox is that none of them can talk to each other, but all of them exist. And if you could meet them, would you agree with their choices? Would you want to swap? Would you feel envious of the one who seems to have everything figured out? Or would you realize that they are just as confused, just as tired, and just as likely to forget their keys as you are? The parallel universe paradox is not just about physics. It is about perspective. It makes you ask what matters more, the choices you made or the choices you never saw. It challenges the idea of fate. It suggests that your path is not the only one, but it is the only one you get to walk. That can be comforting, or it can be terrifying, but mostly it is just weird. So tonight, as you rest your head and drift into dreams, know that somewhere, maybe next door, maybe one plank length to the left, another version of you is also lying in bed thinking about you and wondering if maybe, just maybe, you are the lucky one. Now, before your thoughts start spinning into a cosmic hall of mirrors and asking whether any of them have figured out how to fold fitted sheets without existential dread, here is one final question to gently rattle your reality. If parallel universes really do exist, and one of them is exactly like this one, except the chairs are slightly more comfortable, does that mean you are living in the wrong universe? Or just sitting in the slightly inferior seat of destiny? The butterfly effect paradox. When a tiny flap turns into a hurricane, or just a weird day. The night is quiet. The pillow has become the perfect shape. Your blanket has decided to finally behave. Everything is just right. You are seconds away from sleep, hovering at the edge of a warm mental puddle. And then, without warning, your brain lifts its finger and gently taps the inside of your forehead. What if stepping on a butterfly in the past could turn the future into a flamingo-based dictatorship? Welcome to the butterfly effect paradox. This one flutters in like it means no harm. Just a small concept. Just a tiny change. But the moment it spreads its metaphorical wings, your entire understanding of cause and effect starts unraveling like a poorly tied shoelace. Let us begin with where this fluttering monster of consequence comes from. The term butterfly effect was made famous by Edward Lorenz, a meteorologist who was running simulations on a weather model. One day, he entered a number into his program, rounding it ever so slightly, something like 0.506 instead of 0.506127. Nothing dramatic, just a decimal whisper. The result? A completely different weather pattern. The system went off in a new direction, like a squirrel who suddenly remembered it left the oven on. That tiny change in the initial condition had a huge impact on the final result. Lorenz used the metaphor, does the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? The answer? Maybe. And now your thoughts are flapping too. If the tiniest action in the present can snowball into an entirely different future, what happens when you travel through time? You step into a time machine. You go back 50 years. You pick up a shiny coin from the sidewalk. That coin was going to be picked up by someone else. That person was going to buy a hot dog. That hot dog vendor was going to meet their future spouse that day. Their child was going to become a doctor. That doctor was going to save someone's life who would one day invent solar-powered shoes. Now none of that happens. All because you picked up a coin. This is the butterfly effect paradox. Tiny causes, gigantic effects. An innocent action causing a future so warped it no longer resembles the one you came from. And here is the worst part. You cannot predict it. You cannot control it. You cannot even fully understand it, because most systems like weather, history, and social dynamics are nonlinear. They do not behave in straight lines. They bend, they twist, they explode when poked too hard. So the paradox becomes this. If time travel is real, and every small change has enormous effects, then how can you ever visit the past without turning the future into a confusing soup of regret? You sneeze in 1842. A monarch gets a cold. A treaty never gets signed. Suddenly, the map of Europe looks like someone spilled alphabet soup on it and said, "Good enough." And yet, when you go back in your time machine, you do not see the change happening gradually. It is instant. The future you knew is gone, replaced with a new one. You do not even remember making the mistake, because that version of history is now erased. This means the butterfly effect is not just about chaos. It is about erasure. It is about fragile cause and effect chains that can break with the pressure of a single thought. Now let us imagine a time traveler who goes back to stop a small inconvenience. They want to prevent a bad haircut. They return to the morning of the appointment, fake a phone call, and distract the barber. Mission accomplished. But they did not realize that the barber, having missed their 10 a.m. appointment, stepped outside, bumped into a stranger, struck up a conversation, and decided to move to another city. In that city, They started a business that helped fund a charity that helped send a kid to school. That kid became an engineer. That engineer invented a new kind of bridge that saved thousands of lives. And now, none of that exists because of a haircut. This is the heart of the butterfly effect paradox. You go back to fix something harmless. You come back to find the world no longer runs on electricity. It runs on whisper-powered spoons. And the problem is not just that you changed something, it is that you changed something you did not understand. The consequences are always bigger than the cause. The world is a giant domino track, and every moment is stacked quietly behind the last. Now let us flip this around. What if you go back in time and try not to change anything? You walk carefully. You do not touch anything. You hold your breath and wear soft shoes. But even your presence changes the air. Particles move differently. Your body takes up space. Someone who might have walked one way walks another. You may be the butterfly just by existing. And that means the paradox is unavoidable. You cannot travel back in time and expect the future to stay the same. Even your silence makes noise. But let us not despair. Some scientists believe that if the universe is governed by the laws of quantum mechanics, maybe not every change leads to a disaster. Maybe the changes are absorbed. Maybe they create alternate timelines. Maybe there is a safety net of reality that gently redirects chaos. Others say no. Every flap matters. Every breath is history. Every blink is fate. And that makes time travel not just risky, but morally complicated. Because if every action changes the world, then who gets to decide which version of the world is the right one? You? The time traveler? That seems unfair. Maybe you think a small change will make things better, but better for whom? If the butterfly effect teaches us anything, it is that nobody has all the information. Nobody sees the whole picture. Even the best intentions are blindfolded. So maybe the real paradox is this. In a world where every tiny thing matters, can you ever make a big decision with confidence? Or is life just a series of butterfly moments flapping quietly into the unknown? This is what makes the paradox so powerful. It is not about wings or weather. It is about humility. It reminds you that everything is connected, and that the smallest choice can echo farther than you will ever see. So tonight, as you lie there, wondering what moments in your life flapped the hardest, consider this. Maybe you are already someone else's butterfly. Maybe a choice you made years ago, small, forgotten, unimportant, has shaped someone else's life in a way you will never know. And maybe that is not a burden. Maybe that is a quiet kind of beauty. Now, before your mind spirals into an infinite loop of trying to remember if you held the door open for someone in 2007, and whether that led to a Nobel Prize or a sandwich shop here, is one final question to float gently across your mental sky. If the flap of a butterfly's wings can cause a tornado, what happens when a moth trips over its own feet and lands on the wrong weather app? The twin paradox. When your sibling ages without you and that is somehow legal. The night is soft. Your body is sinking into the mattress like a marshmallow in warm cocoa. The room is calm. Your pillow smells vaguely like laundry and secrets, and you are just about to drift into dreamland when your brain does that thing it does. It leans over, adjusts its imaginary glasses and whispers, "What if I had a twin and we were born at the same time, but they went to space and came back younger than me?" Welcome to the twin paradox. This is not just science fiction. It is real, it is tested, and it has absolutely no regard for your sense of fairness. This paradox is the cosmic sibling rivalry that Einstein himself cooked up, not out of spite, but out of science. And it all starts with one very weird idea. Time does not pass the same for everyone. Let us break this down like bedtime cereal. You have two identical twins. Let us call them Alex and Jamie. They are born seconds apart, grow up together, and argue over the last slice of cake with identical intensity. Then one day, Jamie does something dramatic. Jamie gets into a spaceship, not just any spaceship. A high-speed, relativistic, physics-approved rocket capable of traveling close to the speed of light. Jamie blasts off into space while Alex stays home, watering plants and watching documentaries about raccoons who solve puzzles. Now, here is where things get stretchy. According to Einstein's theory of special relativity, time slows down for objects in motion, especially objects moving at speeds close to light. This is called time dilation. The faster you move, the slower your time ticks, compared to someone who is not moving with you. From Jamie's perspective inside the spaceship, everything feels normal. Time is flowing like it always does. They sip juice, read books, and maybe contemplate the meaning of gravity. But from Alex's perspective back on Earth, Jamie's clock is ticking slower. Let us say Jamie travels away for 5 years at near light speed, then turns around and comes back. For Jamie, the whole trip took 10 years. But when they return to Earth, Alex has aged 15, 20, maybe even 30 years, depending on the speed. Jamie steps out of the spaceship looking fresh and youthful. Alex has gray hair, reading glasses, and possibly a mild interest in crossword puzzles. They were born together, but now they are different ages. This is the twin paradox. And it is real, not just as a thought experiment, but as a confirmed physical effect. We have seen it happen on a smaller scale, with highly accurate atomic clocks flown around in planes. The clock in motion ticks just a tiny bit slower than the one that stayed put. The difference is small but measurable. In other words, time travel into the future is not hypothetical. It is already baked into the universe. You just need a good enough spaceship and a lot of snacks. But here is where the paradox starts poking your brain. From Jamie's point of view, Alex is the one who moved. After all, in space, everything is relative. There is no absolute motion. If you are moving away from Earth, you could say Earth is moving away from you. So why does Jamie get to be younger? Why does time slow for the traveler and not the stay-at-home sibling? The answer lies in the turn. When Jamie reaches their destination and turns around to come home, they change direction. They accelerate. They decelerate. This breaks the symmetry. Alex stayed in one consistent frame of reference, no turns, no drama. Jamie, on the other hand, experienced a shift. And that shift makes all the difference. It introduces an asymmetry into the journey, and with it, the age gap. So even though time is relative, the experiences of Alex and Jamie are not identical. Jamie literally traveled through space-time in a way that slowed their personal clock. And this makes the paradox even more peculiar. Because it is not just about speed, it is about motion, acceleration, and frames of reference. Now let us make this a little more philosophical. If two people start at the same point in time, but one moves differently through the universe and returns younger, what does that mean about time itself? Is it just a personal experience? Is time something you carry with you like a backpack? Or is it more like a river, flowing differently depending on how you move through it? The twin paradox suggests that time is not fixed. It bends, stretches, slows. It adapts to your journey. That means there is no universal now. There is no shared present moment. What you call now may be someone else, later, or earlier, depending on how fast they are going. Which is wild. It means the universe does not keep one master clock. It lets everyone run their own timeline based on how they move. And that turns something as simple as a birthday into a relativistic negotiation. Happy birthday! Actually, by my clock, I turn 33 next week. Well, on Earth, we are already on dessert. Now let us look at the emotional side. Imagine returning home younger than your twin. They have lived a full life. You still feel 25. They have memories, experiences, maybe grandkids. You have only been gone a decade, your decade. You are out of sync with the world.
And that creates more than wrinkles in time. It creates gaps in relationships. The paradox is not just physical, it is human. It challenges how we think about age, connection, and identity. Are you still the same person when everyone else moved ahead? Or have you skipped chapters in the story of life? And what happens if time dilation becomes a tool? Imagine future travelers using it to outlive generations.
You could leave Earth, come back centuries later, and everything has changed, but you have not. You would be a time-skipping witness, a person from the past wandering through the future, like a tourist in a museum where nothing is familiar. The twin paradox becomes more than a physics curiosity. It becomes a roadmap to a kind of one-way time travel. All it takes is enough speed and enough time to bend your personal clock. And while backward time travel still seems impossible, forward travel is right there, hiding in the math, waiting for a launch pad. Now, before your mind starts spinning faster than a space station trying to turn around for coffee, here is one final question to keep your thoughts orbiting peacefully. If you had a twin who went to space and came back younger, would you forgive them for missing your birthday? Or just ask them to pay rent based on their relative age and inflation? The Andromeda Paradox, when your afternoon walk, decides the fate of an alien war. You are lying still. The blankets are heavy in that good, comforting way. The room is quiet. Your mind is quiet. Even your thoughts are whispering to each other, trying not to wake the part of you that finally decided to sleep. Then, without warning, your brain clears its throat and says, "What if a tiny step I take right now changes what is happening millions of light years away in the Andromeda galaxy?" Welcome to the Andromeda Paradox. This one sounds like science fiction. It feels like philosophy. But it comes from the heart of special relativity, the same place that gave us time dilation, twin paradoxes, and the very idea that time and space are more flexible than your morning plans. The Andromeda Paradox was proposed by Roger Penrose, a mathematical physicist who has a long history of thinking thoughts that make other thoughts nervous. Here is the setup. Imagine two people walking past each other on a sidewalk. Let us call them Alex and Jordan. Alex is walking north. Jordan is walking south. Nothing dramatic, just a regular Tuesday stroll. Maybe one of them is eating a snack. Maybe the other is listening to a podcast about the history of stairs. Now here is the twist. According to Einstein's special relativity, each person experiences time a little differently based on their motion. Even though both are walking slowly, barely fast enough to spill coffee, their individual nows are not exactly the same. Because in relativity, simultaneity is not absolute. What one person considers right now is not necessarily what another person, moving differently, would call right now. That is where the Andromeda Galaxy comes in. It is about 2.5 million light-years away, which is far enough to make any long-distance relationship seem reasonable. But according to relativity, the direction and speed you move in affects which events in Andromeda you consider simultaneous with your own present moment. So Alex's now in Andromeda might include a peaceful alien breakfast, while Jordan's now might include those same aliens declaring war on Earth. All because Alex walked one way and Jordan walked the other. They pass each other on the street. They nod politely. And in two completely different versions of the universe, two completely different alien meetings are happening at the exact same time, from each person's perspective. That is the Andromeda Paradox. Small movements on Earth, tiny differences in direction, correspond to huge shifts in what is now in distant galaxies. It is like time is a giant flexible curtain. Move one way, the curtain tilts. Move another way, it bends differently. You think you are just walking to buy milk, but according to physics, your stroll just decided whether the fate of an entire alien civilization happened today or tomorrow. And that is where things start to feel spooky. Because this is not about huge, dramatic speeds. You do not need to approach the speed of light. You can be walking at a perfectly legal pace, wearing a nice sweater, and still alter the present moment in galaxies you will never visit. Relativity is not just for astronauts. It is for you, right now. The universe is listening to how you move. So let us go deeper. This paradox does not suggest that you are causing events in Andromeda. You are not sending signals. You are not responsible for alien diplomacy or meteor showers. But your motion determines what slice of the universe you are currently experiencing as the present. And because there is no universal now, your version of now is yours alone. Which leads to a strange conclusion. Everyone has their own map of what exists, moment by moment. That alien invasion in Andromeda? It might be happening now for Jordan, but later for Alex. Both are right. Both are valid. But they cannot agree on what is happening at this very moment millions of light years away. Which is a lot to take in while still trying to remember if you left the stove on. Now let us return to Earth. Why does this matter? Because it changes how we think about time itself. If simultaneity depends on movement, then the present is not universal. There is no master timeline. Each observer has their own now, shaped by how they move. That means time is not a line everyone shares. It is a collection of overlapping, shifting slices of reality. And you are holding the knife. So when you move, walk, run, orbit, spin, you are not just moving through space. You are slicing through space-time in your own personal direction. That is why two people can live the same moment and yet disagree on what exists at that moment far away. It is not a bug in the universe. It is a feature. Now let us imagine this on a cosmic scale. An alien on a distant planet points a telescope at Earth. They see the past. That is normal. Light takes time to travel. Maybe they see dinosaurs. Maybe they see disco. Either way, they are watching Earth's history unfold in real-time delay. But here is the kicker. Depending on how that alien is moving, what they consider to be now on Earth changes. To one alien, Earth's now might be 2025. To another, it might still be 1860. Same place, different motion, different timelines. That means the idea of what is happening right now is more like what is happening right now for me, given how I am moving, which makes the entire universe feel a bit more personal. You are not just drifting through space. You are carrying your own version of time with you, like an invisible luggage set filled with clocks that only obey your rules. So what does the Andromeda Paradox really tell us? It tells us that time is not absolute. It tells us that motion matters. It tells us that every step you take changes your relationship with distant galaxies, even if you never know it. And that is beautiful. Because it means even the smallest actions have cosmic echoes. You do not need to be a time traveler. You already are. Every movement is a new slice of now. Every breath changes your frame of reference. You are participating in the shape of time, just by existing. And sure, you may never see the aliens in Andromeda. You may never know if they declared peace or war while you were brushing your teeth. But somewhere, in the swirling dance of space-time, your version of now is part of their story. Now, before your thoughts begin launching their own intergalactic news broadcasts based on which direction you rolled over in bed, here is one final question to wrinkle your timeline gently. If the aliens in Andromeda go to war because you decided to walk to the store instead of ordering delivery, does that make you a cosmic general or just someone with very powerful calves? The information paradox. When the universe forgets things it is supposed to remember. The night is quiet. Your bed feels like a cloud that went to therapy. The light from the hallway is dimming. Your thoughts are tiptoeing toward dreams. And just as you begin to loosen your grip on the day, a question appears in your mind like an unexpected guest. If I toss something into a black hole, where does the information go? Welcome to the information paradox. This is one of those paradoxes that sounds harmless at first, like losing your favorite sock or misplacing your keys. But in the world of physics, it is a question so disturbing that it keeps scientists up at night, blinking at ceiling tiles and whispering, "This makes no sense," into mugs of cold coffee. Let us start with the basics. Information, in physics, is not just data or gossip or the password you forgot to write down. It is the precise details about a physical system. Everything has information. A baseball has information about its mass, its velocity, its position, and its deeply personal dream of becoming a satellite. At a fundamental level, The universe is made of this kind of information. And here is the rule. Information can never be destroyed. You can shred a paper, burn a book, drop a phone in the ocean. But the information, in principle, is still there. It might be scrambled, scattered, or hiding inside a puff of smoke, but it is not gone. Quantum mechanics insists on this. Information must be conserved. Now let us add the problem. Imagine you throw something into a black hole, a diary, a pizza, your collection of highly specific regrets. Whatever it is, once it crosses the event horizon, the black hole, S point of no return, it is gone from your world. You cannot see it. You cannot touch it. You cannot get it back. According to general relativity, the object is lost to the singularity, the dense core where space-time goes to therapy and comes back confused. The black hole gains a little mass. Its gravitational pull grows. But everything else vanishes. Here is the paradox. If information cannot be destroyed, but the black hole swallows it and never gives it back, where did it go? Quantum mechanics screams, "It has to be somewhere." General relativity shrugs and says, "Not my problem." And physics, as a whole, has a panic attack. This is the information paradox, a disagreement between the two most successful theories in science, a fundamental conflict between how we understand the very fabric of reality and how that fabric handles secrets. Let us make this more dramatic. Say you throw in a toaster. The black hole eats it. From the outside, the only things that change are the black hole's mass, spin, and electric charge. That is all it shows to the universe. These three features define what physicists call the no-hair theorem, which states black holes have no hair, no features, no memories, no personality. You could throw in a toaster, a flamingo, or an encyclopedia of bad decisions. As long as the mass, spin, and charge are the same, the black hole looks identical afterward. It does not care what it swallowed. It gives you no way to recover what was lost. And that breaks everything. Because if black holes destroy information, then quantum mechanics is wrong. But if quantum mechanics is right, then something is missing from our understanding of black holes. Stephen Hawking was the first to throw fuel on this already burning philosophical campfire. He showed that black holes are not entirely black. They emit what is now called Hawking radiation, a slow leak of particles caused by quantum effects near the event horizon. Over time, this radiation causes the black hole to lose mass, to shrink, eventually to evaporate. You heard that correctly. Black holes evaporate. They fade away. And when they vanish completely, all that is left is this radiation. But here is the twist. Hawking radiation does not carry any of the original information. It is random, featureless, like a cosmic sigh. So if a black hole swallows your pizza, emits random radiation for a few trillion years, and then disappears, the information about your pizza is truly gone. That violates the most sacred principle in quantum theory. And scientists everywhere collectively said, absolutely not. So began the long search for answers. Some said, maybe the information escapes with the Hawking radiation, but we just do not understand how. Others said, maybe the information is stored on the event horizon, encoded like data on a two-dimensional surface. This idea became the holographic principle, the concept that everything inside a volume of space can be described by information on its boundary. It is like watching a three-dimensional movie projected from a two-dimensional screen. We might be living in a cosmic hologram, where black holes are just the ultimate Blu-ray players. Another idea. Maybe the information is preserved inside the black hole, and when the black hole evaporates, it leaves behind a tiny remnant, a particle-sized memory stick full of everything it ever ate. But this raises its own problems. Remnants could lead to infinite copies of everything, and that makes math cry. Some physicists have proposed even stranger things, like firewalls, not the kind that protect your computer, but actual walls of energy at the event horizon. These would burn up anything that tries to enter, breaking the laws of physics right where we least want them to break. Other ideas involve quantum entanglement, wormholes, or even rewriting the structure of space-time itself. The point is, nobody agrees. And that is what makes the information paradox such a big deal. It is not just about black holes. It is about what kind of universe we live in. If information can truly be lost, then determinism is gone. You could not predict the future based on the past. The universe would have memory holes. It would forget things. And a universe that forgets is a universe that cannot be trusted. It becomes a place where cause and effect are optional, where actions vanish without consequence, where physics checks its voicemail and then pretends it never got the message. So the paradox is not just about a toaster or a diary or even a person. It is about the rules. It is about whether those rules are absolute or whether black holes are allowed to rip them up when nobody is looking. Most physicists believe that somehow, somewhere, the information must be preserved. They just have not figured out how. And until they do, the paradox remains. A cosmic mystery, a hole in our understanding. A place where two brilliant theories stand on opposite sides of a chasm and shout, "It is your fault." So tonight, as you lie in bed and listen to the gentle hum of the universe not evaporating, know this. You are part of a story that is still being written. A story about what happens to everything we lose, and whether the universe keeps secrets or just misplaces them for a while. Now, before your thoughts start spiraling toward the edge of a theoretical singularity and wondering whether your favorite childhood drawing is still somewhere in the folds of reality, here is one final question to drop into the black hole of your imagination. If you toss your most embarrassing memory into a black hole and the universe eventually forgets it, does that make the black hole your best friend? Or just the world's most judgment-free diary? The Novikov self-consistency principle paradox, when the universe becomes its own editor. The night is deep and quiet. The stars are patiently waiting outside your window. Your body feels like it has finally negotiated a peace treaty with gravity. Sleep is close. But just before your brain shuts the door for the night, it pulls out a chair and whispers, "What if you went back in time to change the past?" And the universe politely refused. Welcome to the Novikov self-consistency principle paradox. This one is not chaotic. It is not about timelines shattering into pieces or the future being rewritten with dramatic music and a montage. No, this paradox is calm, composed, dignified. It sips tea while wearing glasses and insists that no matter how hard you try to alter the past, you will fail, because the universe simply will not let you succeed. Let us begin with the basics. Imagine you have a time machine. You sit down in the seat, set the date, and press the big red button marked "Make Things Better." You travel back to a critical moment, maybe to stop a disaster, save a friend, or prevent yourself from making that one haircut decision that still haunts your passport photo. But every time you try to intervene, something goes wrong. You get stuck in traffic, your phone battery dies. A bird flies into your face at just the right angle to knock you off course. It is not that the universe is punishing you. It is that the universe is protecting itself. This is the Novikov self-consistency principle, the idea that if time travel is possible, then any actions you take in the past must already be part of history. You cannot change the past, because your actions were always part of how things happened. There is no changing history, only fulfilling it. Now let us see how that plays out. Imagine you try to go back in time to stop a fire from burning down a library. You arrive. You rush in. But as you try to pull the alarm, you slip on a puddle, knock over a candle, and start the fire yourself. Congratulations. You just became part of the event you were trying to prevent. That is the paradox. You tried to rewrite history, but your attempt was the very reason history unfolded the way it did. It is a closed loop, a story with no edits allowed. The Novikov principle says that the timeline is self-consistent. It cannot contain contradictions. No matter what you do, you cannot create a paradox. If you travel back in time, everything you do will either be insignificant or necessary for the timeline to remain consistent. This turns time travel into something less like a sandbox and more like a museum. You can walk around, you can look, you can breathe, but you cannot move the exhibits. Try to touch something, and the velvet rope of causality stops you cold. Let us test this idea with a classic example, the grandfather paradox. You travel back in time with the goal of stopping your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, thereby preventing your own birth. Not because you dislike yourself, but because you are curious and maybe a little dramatic. Under the Novikov principle, you will not succeed. You might get distracted. You might meet someone who accidentally introduces them instead. You might be the reason they fall in love in the first place. No matter what happens, the timeline will twist itself into a shape where your existence is preserved. It does not need to break. It just needs to bend. And that makes time travel feel less like changing the past and more like discovering how you were always part of it. This is comforting in one way and deeply unsettling in another. On one hand, you cannot ruin the universe. On the other hand, you also cannot fix it. You are part of a puzzle that solves itself. Now let us consider the implications. If every action you take in the past must be consistent with the present, then free will starts to feel like an illusion. You can choose your actions, but only from a menu that leads back to the same outcome. The universe becomes a choose-your-own-adventure book where every ending leads to the same final page. But here is the twist. From your perspective, everything still feels normal. You still make decisions. You still act. You still try. It is just that the universe only allows the version of events that keeps itself tidy. It is like having a cosmic editor that removes any sentence that causes a plot hole. You write. The editor trims. You scream. The editor underlines it in red. Let us explore a thought experiment. Suppose a scientist builds a machine that sends a message back in time, a warning not to build the machine because it will cause an accident. The message arrives. The scientist reads it. They pause, they think. But then they shrug and build the machine anyway. The message did not stop them. It was always part of the story. Maybe it made them hesitate. Maybe it made them check the wiring twice. But the final result? The machine still gets built. The timeline remains consistent. Now let us zoom out. What does the Novikov self-consistency principle say about the nature of reality? It suggests the universe is not just a collection of events, but a single self-contained structure, a story where every page fits together. No matter how far you travel in time, you cannot step outside that structure. You are inside the book. You can reread chapters, you can underline passages, but you cannot tear out pages. Even if you try, the book gently folds itself back together and hands you a pen with the cap still on. Some physicists believe this principle could save us from the worst parts of time travel. No paradoxes, no broken timelines, just loops, consistent loops. It is a very polite form of time travel. But others push back. They ask, what if there is more than one timeline? What if every trip to the past creates a new branch? What if the Novikov principle only applies to one timeline and the multiverse handles the rest? That is a different paradox for another day. For now, we live in Novikov's world, a place where every attempt to rewrite history is already part of the script, a place where time travel is not a tool for change, but a revelation. You go back not to fix the past, but to discover your place in it. You are not a god with a remote. You are a character in a novel with very strict editors. Now, before your thoughts start rewriting their own childhood memories and trying to figure out whether you were the one who convinced your parents to name you, here is one final question to close this self-consistent loop. If the universe refuses to let you change the past no matter how hard you try, does that make time travel an exciting adventure? Or just the most expensive way to prove your stubbornness to yourself in front of a crowd of unimpressed physicists? The temporal Dopelganger Paradox. When you meet yourself and both of you blame the other, the room is still. Your limbs are sinking into the bed like forgotten stones. The ceiling has become your gentle night sky. Just as sleep begins to pull the curtain on today, your brain shuffles to the front of the stage and whispers, "What would happen if I met another version of me? From another time?" Welcome to the Temporal Doppelganger Paradox. This is the point in the story where time travel stops being a noble quest or a cool plot device and starts feeling a lot like running into yourself at the grocery store. Except one of you remembers this moment and the other has not lived it yet. The paradox begins with a simple idea. What if you met your past self or your future self? Not in a metaphorical, "look how far I have come" kind of way, but in the real, physical sense. You, in front of you, same face, same voice, possibly wearing better shoes. There you both are, same person, different moments in time. Now the questions come pouring in like confused pigeons. Are you the same person? If you fight, who wins? If one of you gets hurt, does the other feel it? Can you give yourself advice? Can you borrow money? Can you date the same person? No, really. Stop and think about that last one. But first, let us unpack what makes this paradox so deliciously messy. It all starts with identity. You are one person with one continuous thread of memory. That thread is what gives you the sense of being you. You remember your childhood, your breakfast, and that one very specific thing you said in 7th grade that still wakes you up at night. But now imagine that thread splits. You jump into a time machine and land 10 years into your own past. Now there are two of you. You, the time traveler, and you from the past. From a biological standpoint, identical. From a timeline standpoint, wildly different. The paradox begins to simmer. If you talk to yourself, are you rewriting your own memory? Or are you writing an entirely new one? Let us say future. You tells past you to invest in something small but explosive, perhaps flavored toothpaste for dogs. Past you listens. Past you becomes rich. Now, when future you returns to their own time, what happens? Has the future changed? Does future you now remember being rich? Or do they still remember being broke, even though they just altered the past? This is the temporal doppelganger paradox. It is the paradox of self-duplication across time. The moment two versions of the same person coexist, time stops being a straight line and starts acting like a group project led by two people who think they are both in charge. Now let us imagine this encounter is not friendly. Say you go back in time and try to stop your past self from making a huge mistake. Something embarrassing. Something involving karaoke, a fog machine, and a very poor understanding of choreography. But your past self resists. They do not believe you. They think you are a liar, or worse, a weird fan with an obsession for obscure mistakes. A struggle ensues. You both tumble into a conveniently placed river. Now what? If one version of you knocks the other unconscious, do both of you wake up with a headache? If one version dies, does the other vanish? Or does the universe split into two timelines, one where you are wet and confused, and another where you never made it out of the fog? Some theories say the timeline will branch. Each version will go on to live their own life, like two slightly different sitcoms that share the same pilot episode. Other theories say the timeline cannot handle duplicates, that it will collapse. That the paradox of two identical people occupying the same space and time will unravel causality itself and trigger something dramatic, perhaps thunder, or at the very least, awkward silence. But then there is the third option. What if nothing changes? What if meeting yourself is not only possible, but inevitable? After all, who else could understand you better? You could finish each other's sentences, or argue over whose haircut looked better. Either way, you would know exactly where to poke for maximum irritation. Now let us take this one step further. What if your doppelganger is not from your past or future, but from an alternate version of your timeline? A slightly different you. Maybe they chose different hobbies. Maybe they stuck with clarinet. Maybe they never trusted that one friend who always borrowed things and returned them slightly wetter. This version of you shows up and says, I am you, but I turned left instead of right at the intersection of destiny. You now have a temporal twin from a parallel track, and here comes the paradox again. If they stay, do they take your place? If you switch lives, will the universe notice? What happens when someone else's version of you starts making choices in your life? Now there are ripples, choices you did not make, events you did not witness, but memories you still somehow carry. That is the strangest part of the paradox. When two versions of the same person occupy the same world, the universe must make a choice. Either it embraces the confusion and lets both of you bumble around trying not to crash the timeline, or it folds one of you back into the story and pretends nothing ever happened. And in the quiet moments afterward, neither of you knows which one got to stay. Now let us bring this back to something you can hold. Identity is built on memory, but memory is not always reliable. So if you meet yourself and the two of you disagree about the past, who is right? Which version of your story is the official one? That is the real paradox. You cannot be two people at once, but you are. Every choice you make splits you in half. The version that said yes, the version that said no, the version that said maybe and wandered off to buy snacks. If you meet one of those versions, it will feel familiar and strange, and just a little bit like looking into a mirror that has strong opinions about your life. So tonight, as you lie there with only one version of yourself in the room, as far as you know, remember this. You are not the only you that could have existed, but you are the only one who got here. And that makes your timeline, mistakes, karaoke, and all, worth something. Now, before your thoughts spiral into a mental game of hide-and-seek between 5 theoretical versions of yourself, all arguing about who forgot to pay the electric bill, here is one final question to shake hands with your internal multiverse. If your future self shows up to warn you about something, but you both end up just ordering takeout and watching television, does that count as a paradox? Or just the most aggressively scheduled personal day in history?